Hello and welcome back to Off Track Podcast with me, Dave Neal. This week, proudly sponsored by TIG Welding Specialist 77 Fabs. With over 40 years experience in titanium and aluminium fabrications, including one-off full titanium exhaust systems for race, road and custom machines, they also offer a repair service for swing arms, frames, fuel tanks and more. 77 Fabs also produce race and championship winning components at national and international level, including the Isle of Man, British Superbikes and the World Sidecar Championships. So a huge thank you to Sean Ryde at 77 Fabs for sponsoring this episode. My great guest this week is one of the most recognizable voices in the sport. We go deep into his career, we discuss the sport in general, including commentary, and the reasons why he's no longer on our screens and in our ears. Before we dive in, our Patron page is in the show description below. Click more, scroll down, and that's where you'll find it. If you'd like early access to the shows, the chance to ask questions of our guests, and be in the draw for a day out at Inch Perfect Trials on the 20th of March with the AJN Steel Stock Kawasaki BSB team. Right, let's get on with it. It's absolutely fascinating from the very beginning. Just for you, it's the superb Keith Huewen. Enjoy.
Keith Huewen, welcome to the Stirrup Cup. Nice to see you, mate. Hi. Back in the pub. Always in the cub. I seem to spend half my life here at Chris's pub.
Well, we did last night. It was a great night, wasn't it?
Great night. We're Monday night sometime. We're in bloody Kettering or near Kettering.
Yeah.
And where can you find a night like that on a Monday?
It was superb. The comedians were absolutely brilliant.
Well, I've got a lot to live up to now, haven't I?
It could have been an even longer night if we didn't have the comedians as well, couldn't it? We'd have sat there, yourself, Sam and Malenko. It was...
Having said that, they did shut the bar, if you did, and then they shut the till. We couldn't even pay the bill.
Who's left with the tab?
Me. How does that happen?
It was always going to happen at some point. It's great to see you. Welcome back. It's been a while since we've had you on.
A long, long time now. I mean, it's amazing how fast time goes by, especially when you get to my age.
Oh, he says. With the young family, keeping you young, that's the great thing.
Still, yeah.
So how's life treating you at the minute? Everything good?
It's good, yeah. I mean, it's slowed down from an international travel point of view, although we do find ourselves. I mean, I'm going to Buriram later on this month to the Grand Prix, which will be good fun. I'm looking forward to that. But I miss someone else paying for business or first class.
Becomes expensive now, doesn't it, air travel?
I'm in the back now. I'm like this in the back with everybody else.
Cattle class for Keith.
That's it.
So you're just going out there just for a holiday? Around, look at the first round?
Well, as you know, I live there. I've lived there for quite a long time in Thailand. Our family live out there. I mean, Mike Trimby took us out there in the first time when it was Macau back in the day. Mike Trimby sadly now no longer with us, but right the way back in the day was when we first went out to Macau and then on to Thailand as a bit of R&R. And of course, it's 40, 45 years worth of being in and out of the place. And then in the end, I kind of ended up finding myself family-wise, 22 years married, 3 girls with Venus. Obviously, I've got an older one as well. And so 4 girls to service and look after is quite a big deal.
The petticoat government looms large for you.
And a young wife.
And a young wife as well. We do like him younger. We're both in that. We're both in that bracket. We've been planning this one for a little while now, and it was time to have you back on because you were one of the very first people that I interviewed when I started this podcast malarkey back in 2013. I'd spoken to Jorge Lorenzo, I'd spoken to Danny Kent, and then we spoke in the IRTA boardroom. And Jules came in and joined us. And that's 12 years ago this year.
Yeah, well, two of them didn't have any world championships between them.
Sadly. But the entertainment was still the same, mate. Don't worry about that.
Yeah, entertainment is you know, it's the thing that passion for sport is something that Jules has always had. And it's a fact. What comes out of his mouth is pure passion. One of the things that I've always found quite difficult is when you've got journalistic journeymen that are looking to go somewhere else with their commentary. I think commentary is something that's from the heart. It's something that you don't really rehearse. You're not really thinking about a performance. You're saying it as you see it. You're saying it as you believe in it. And I think that's very important. And we've kind of lost a bit of that in recent times, I think. I'm sure we'll get to that later on in this conversation. But I think that there are so many constraints now on commentators and on people that are in sport that are providing sport coverage to people now. You've got, your P's and Q's and you're crossing T's and dotting I's. And you've got a whole raft of compliance people now that are looking over your shoulder for what you're saying or doing. And there are certain people that don't fit into that category. I'm one of them. We've lost in recent times. We've lost another one, in my view, Charlie Hiscott. You don't see Charlie Hiscott anymore. He's been slowly eased away. Why? Because he's got a freaking personality. That's why.
He's not afraid to ask the questions. How dare you offend them by asking a question?
There is the problem.
I mean, I spoke to Brent Gladwin a few weeks ago, and Brent he said, look, my vocabulary is old. I don't have a modern vocabulary. He said, and in terms of commentary, you can't have an older vocabulary these days. It makes it so difficult for what you can and can't say. And it doesn't feel natural because for me, I've done one race with Greg Haynes back in 2019. It was a MotoStar race, never aired. It was on the player, so barely anybody saw it back then, thankfully. You're thinking about what you can't say rather than what you can say. Is that fair?
It is, but I mean, again, it's something you don't think about. If you're having to think about commentary, and that's the problem nowadays with some commentators, they are thinking too deeply into it because it's their career.
Absolutely.
I never give a shit.
Culture.
I never gave a shit.
They can soon be pulled away.
You know, you do what you do because somebody said to me one time, you get old enough or wealthy enough to not give a shit.
Yeah.
And that's the best commentary. Sadly, I'm out of work.
And we'll come to that later on. There's a question for that from our patrons later on. But let's go back to the beginning. We'll come to the commentary bit there because that's going to be a fascinating section anyway. But maybe some of the viewers, I mean, I was going down the YouTube rabbit hole, as you do when you're researching for these chats. And I'm sure it was 83 or 84 where you were a co-commentator. I don't know if you were out injured, if you didn't have a ride. I'm sure it was 83 or 84 that was your first appearance as a co-commentator. Is that right?
Well, I'd done stuff with a fellow called Chris Carter.
Yeah, it was
Chris Carter, brilliant commentator back in the day. I mean, you'll come across his commentaries on YouTube if you look them up, that is for sure. You know, Chris used to invite me into the commentary box between my races. Yeah. So you'd go and do a 250 race or whatever it would be back in the day. And for free food. Yeah. That changed. And Carter used to provide free food and a dubious sense of humour, and you'd have a great time doing it in between. You used to fill your days full of whatever you felt like doing. But yeah, I used to commentate on stuff for Anglia Television. You know, back in the day when Steve Ryder was only just beginning. Now Steve Ryder has ended. He's virtually out of most things except, I think, touring cars. On ITV4 or something, yeah. But it was, Steve Ryder was just a budding reporter for Anglia Television back then. And so you kind of go back, I go back a hell of a long way. But I used to base what I did and the way I did it on Sheene. Yeah. Because the whole object of me doing commentary was to get my sponsors fitted into the commentary in a place they couldn't edit it out. And Barry was brilliant at it. Like whatever you were talking about, you would somehow get your sponsor's name into it. On national television. That was the whole way. But you had to put it in a way that they couldn't cut it. You know, so it would have been disjointed if they cut it out. So you always got your sponsors in. So that was the initial why I bothered doing it, was because I needed to get SDC Builders, for instance, into the equation. It's funny how that moves around as well. SDC Builders, they sponsored me at that time on 500s and Jonathan Palmer in Formula One, when it was a normally aspirated and turbo Formula One back in that day. So JP and I go back a long way. And we used to cover like boxing matches and stuff like that for SDC Builders. And Palmer used to give us the benefit of his driving around Bedford as it was back then. Absolute freaking lunatic. Probably still is, but that's only counting money.
Those little rubber things. I mean, when you go back to your early racing career, and Jules was quite quick to point out that you were one of our best ever 350 riders back in the day. He bestowed that upon you. He was quite adamant of that.
There were lots back then, you know. I mean, the thing is, we were geared for moving to Grand Prix then.
Yeah.
We're not now. We are heading towards Superbike, Super Sport. It may change, but unfortunately, British riders come on later in life to start with, so which you could do in my day, because everyone was late in life back then. But now, if you're not 15 and already a world champion in the Spanish series, then you're going to struggle to get into Moto 3.
Absolutely.
So it's a very difficult lifestyle now compared with then. But you had a lot of very, very fast people in this country on 250s and 350s. You could buy a 250 or 350 Yamaha, brand spanking new. I mean, I remember when it arrived in a crate at the garage I was working for at the time, the Three Musketeers garage. We used to call them the Three Racketeers, the three guys who owned the garage. It was hilarious. On the A428 between Yardley Hastings and Lavenden, anybody who knows that bit of road. And when it arrived, I uncrated it at lunchtime, you know. Long hair, greasy looking git that I was back then. Not much different now. And basically uncrated it, fueled it up, run it in up and down the road outside like you would do. You used to hear Joey Dunlop used to do that all the time.
Absolutely.
Ballymoney, but Northamptonshire hadn't really been heard of. And that was a TZ350 that you could buy at really sensible money and go and race it at Grand Prix level. And if you knew what you were at, tuning, setting up a two-stroke back in the day was a skill that you learned through your club racing days. It was all consistent. It was easy to move yourself through there, and it was cost-effective. Unfortunately, nowadays, the amount of money you need to run just a bloody superstock bike is outrageous.
6 figures plus, and to run the team, and it's way beyond what it was.
I remember Rutter.
Figures are ridiculous now.
When Rutter was running Mackenzie, I remember saying, bloody hell, mate, you know how much money this is bloody costing me? No, well, he's like with his dry sense of humour, Michael Rutter. He's brilliant.
One of the greatest. We've had many a great guest, and he's right up there with them. He was superb.
He's so dry. You have to be on the ball just to get him.
Well, I was happy with an hour if we got it. What we're doing this for? I said, look, you're launching a superbike team, so you kind of need to tell people about it, and then throw a few questions in about the TT and Macau, and then all of a sudden we got an hour and a half, and I believe he enjoyed it. So that was worthwhile.
I'm sure he did.
But I know Roger's told us. Roger Burnett said back in the day, what you could do, you could literally turn up at a GP.
Well, you did.
If you were quick enough, you could qualify and you could race.
There was a fellow called Doug Barnfield who was the head of the ACU back in the day. Bloody useless he was, but bless him, he got knocked off his bike and killed a few years ago and outside Daventry, somewhere near here. And Doug Barnfield, why did we have back then, the ACU was that we used to call it, ACU stands for another cock-up, because every single time, getting to where you're saying, you turn up at a Grand Prix and they hadn't done the paperwork.
Right.
So the first free practice that you had, effectively, you had to sit out because the paperwork from the ACU hadn't made it to the organisers. And I remember sitting in Mike Trimby's motorhome one time, the great Mike Trimby, and Doug Barnfield knocked on the door, and I'd only just been off the scale revving up with Mike, saying what idiots they were and the fact that they were holding us back. It was at Assen. And as I went for Doug Barnfield's throat, as he went to step on the bottom step of the motorhome, Trimby got hold of my belt, held us back from getting Barnfield around the neck. God, that used to infuriate me. I mean, it was so unprofessional the way it was run back in the day. I had no idea whether it's still running the same way. They were back in the Vernon Cooper days.
Yeah.
Who was the guy that was investigated, if you remember, on television by whoever it was, that big fat guy that used to do the
Roger Cook.
That's him, Roger Cook. So it was an appalling situation, and we had, back to the story, 350s. Yeah, you could make one fast enough to win a Grand Prix.
Yeah,
very nearly did, but you were up against factory Kawasaki's, some factory Yamahas. Anton Mang,
Corky Ballington.
Well, Ballington and co. Yeah, I mean Ballington was Greg Hansford. If you go back before me, those guys were a bit before me. Corky actually was a mate of mine. I remember I overtook him once on TZ750, and he said to Dave Potter, that boy's heading for a fall. And I think the very next time I did.
But those guys, but those guys all raced in, and you don't get that now. You don't get the depth of field that we used to. I know times move on and times change. We've had some great chats with Wayne Gardner last week and Roger Marshall the week before about the transatlantic time.
I put the Yardbirds on just for Roger because it's his era.
Particularly for Reg. He's one of his favourites. It's and you look back on YouTube and the people that you raced against and beat, the list, and we'll come on to transatlantic and things like that because it's all fascinating and the audience are absolutely loving the stories from back then. It was a different time.
It was a different time. It was of its time. It will never go back to that time because what happens is professionalism and factories. Factories used to hate you riding in those kind of go to Schwanenstadt and do the streets because they'd pay you $2,000 or whatever it was to go there. You know, you were building money. The only reason I came off the little bikes, I mean, I should have stayed. If it had been now, I'd have stayed with the little bikes longer and maybe could have won a world title. Purely and simply, it's speculative. You know, I finished 6th in the World Championship and I only did half the rounds. Yeah, it was there to be had you been funded enough and been able to. But the only reason I went up to 500 as soon as I could was because that's the only way you can earn any real money. You had to have top-end bikes. And of course, they cost more money. The bikes that you could buy in those days, production versions of were nowhere near. They were 20 mile an hour slower than a factory bike, 25 mile an hour slower than a factory bike in a straight line. So you were never going to quite make it with that. It was of its time. I think that I've been lucky. I was on the tail end of the Barry Sheene era. Yep. Which was great fun. Really, really good fun. Paddocks were good fun. You know, you just thought, shit, I'm getting paid for being in a party. You know, it was great fun from that time. And then, of course, when I retired, when I finished from racing, which I finished racing when I was 31, which is relatively early, because there was no money. We were into a big recession. There was no money around, all the rest of it. And I went into broadcasting. And at that point was the dream time, the golden era of television as Sky, well, it was Eurosport originally in London. Eurosport got ruled against the European Broadcasting Union, I think, ruled against the transgressions of Murdoch and co. for what they were doing with football. So Eurosport went off to TF1 in France, to the broadcaster in France, and Sky Sports was born in London. Me and Jules were over in Paris having a good time doing the stuff for TF1 for the Eurosport French version. Quite good fun. And it was at the point where I'd parted company with the mother of my eldest daughter at that point. So I'm ready to rock and roll. And then I came back for Sky Sports. And we had that golden era then of when, you know, Foggy won his first World Superbike race. And we suddenly had the Foggy era that coincided with the Sky Sports era. What a great time.
Well, this is, again, something it occurred to me when talking to Jules, and we come back to the commentary side again, but you had the Foggy years as part of your commentary, and you had the Marquez years.
We've been very lucky. Jules and I have been very lucky. We got paid huge money. That's why I had to do Jules's deals. He's useless at doing deals. He really was. He was absolutely, but yeah, how much am I getting paid?
I'll settle my half of the bill.
You won't. It's getting bigger by the moment here. The amount of hangers on we've had, Stuart Parker. But it was, I mean, we've been very, very fortunate. I smile at myself for Jules. I used to have to do his deals because otherwise, because I wanted paying a certain level. And if I didn't get him to a certain level, I couldn't be at that level.
So you've got to be incremental. It's got to be.
I had to do Jules's deals for him. I hope you're grateful.
There's no doubt he is. You've got to be commercially savvy, and it's something I have no commercial nous whatsoever. But when you, from the motorcycle racing perspective, especially in the early days, developing sponsors, negotiating, even start money, negotiating things like that.
It's never been easy. It's funny, about 15 years ago, we moved house, and you know, the filing cabinet, you always got filing cabinets full of your life. And I was moving one particular filing cabinet, and of course, the worst thing you can do is open the drawer and start flicking through, because then you're there for the next 10 days. Or old girlfriends, photographs of this, photographs of that. But the interesting one was the black book with the earnings in for 1 year. 1979, I bought a motorhome off of Barry Sheene and a 3-bedroom detached house out of the earnings that year. Cash.
Incredible.
I remember walking into the estate agents, and this little old lady was behind the counter. I said, I'm interested in... She said, we'll need a deposit. I said, what do you mean you need a deposit? Well, we need a deposit to show your interest. She said, have you got a mortgage? I said, no, don't need one. The look on her face at the time. I mean, I'm not showing off, but that was how it was back then.
That's how it was when money was available.
And we were at the end of a period where it was even bigger money. Like Barry would get his brown envelope from Scarborough that would have 10, 15 grand in it. The story that that amuses the hell out of me is There was the sheet that went round recently, well, not so recently, it must have been about a year, 18 months ago now, that had the start money for Mallory, I think it was Mallory Park.
It was Mallory Park. It was a John Player meeting at Mallory. Yeah.
And it was the first time I'd been paid. Arnie Fletcher, who was my sponsor from Manchester Motorcycles, as was sadly now not there. Arnie's still around though. It was a sheet of money, and I think Kenny Roberts Sr. had got paid 10 grand. And there's the story about him having to stuff it in a petrol tank to get it back into the States, because and to smuggle the money back in because of money laundering and the like. But he got his 10 grand back over there. And on the bottom of the list was this little fella called Keith Huewen, £25. So Hodgie being Hodgie, taking the piss as usual, is interviewing Kenny Roberts at COTA, Circuit of the Americas, for a Grand Prix a couple of years ago. And they're saying, look at this money you got paid here in Orris. He said, no, look, Keith Huewen, 25 quid. And Kenny turns around, looks at the camera and said, well, I guess we were both overpaid. Absolute swine.
Rioters about.
I love Kenny. He's one of the top men. He's the hardest man on the outside and the softest man on the inside. His
eyes give him away sometimes.
Yeah, he's a lovely man. I remember we flew him down by helicopter from Donington Park and to Sky Sports to the studio shortly after Wayne had his massive accident, Wayne Rainey. And I remember asking him the question about Wayne, and I could see a tear building in his eye. And I remember being really panicked. It'd be like you bringing out something where I'm starting to cry here. You just wouldn't have expected it from somebody that you'd got as his hard case, which he was on track.
Yeah.
It really upset him and still does. The Wayne Rainey situation really upsets him still. Terrible situation, but I don't know how. I mean, we can get on that subject again. He had that experience with Wayne. He had that experience with Gary Cowan, if you remember, at Daytona, who was riding for Kenny at the time as well, who also has ended up with same situation. Wayne and Kenny go back a long way, and they're really solid together, and I mean that upsetting. But anyway, that's another story. He's a hard man with a soft centre.
We touched on this with WG and with Reg, the times, and with Stavros last year. We'll just touch on this now because it was an intrinsic sad part of the sport. The safety nowadays compared to
there was none.
Your peak.
There was none.
In terms of equipment, in terms of trackside. We spoke about it as what Stavros said. Is that how many meetings?
I got holes in me just from sliding up the road. That's without breakages. I was very, very fortunate. I did a wrist. I dislocated the shoulder 2 or 3 times. Scaphoid, and that's it. And then from my era, that's getting away lightly. That's very lightly, which I'm very grateful for.
Absolutely.
But you're right. I mean, the amount of people that were killed or badly damaged. It's a strange thing because I always used to think there was something wrong with me because I had no emotion over it back in the day. I do now. I remember them like they were my, like yesterday. I remember, we always were a bit I operated in a slightly different way to a lot of people. Like we socialised in the paddock, but we didn't live in and out of each other's houses. I didn't really. We had 1 or 2 close friends, but when Neil Robinson was killed, Smutty Robinson, he was a kid that was on the ramp for some superstardom. He was really, really fast, lovely personality. He was the only guy really that was embedded in our family. Like, we all knew him. Mum knew him and so on and so forth. But and when he was killed at Scarborough, God, that wrecked our household. And that was the first real taste of really heartfelt emotion for me and for us at that particular time. But now, I mean, I remember my mates like it was yesterday, those that aren't with us anymore. And there's nothing you could actually do about it, but I do think that the people that were in charge of our sport back then were absolute wankers. Terrible. A little bit of thought, and it wouldn't have taken much. 50 pence as it was for a bale of hay or whatever it was back in the day. And they didn't put it out. Vernon Cooper, particularly, you go back to, I think Silverstone, when he refused to put some bales out. Was it Kim Newcomb was killed down at Stowe, I think it was. When they'd asked for bales of hay and it didn't get put there. You know, Alton Park, when Dave Potter was killed, when you went down the avenue, the left-hand kink before you go out towards Ireland, there was a piece of barrier that was basically bare. You know, we were quite close to Dave back in those days because Ted Broad was a mate of Arnie Fletcher's, and then we used to swap Yamaha parts and all sorts of stuff between the teams in those days. Another thing, sharing was caring back in the day. You know, if somebody wanted a part, you absolutely. That makes me smile as well. I always remember Damon Hill coming to the back. Keith, can you lend me this? Damon Hill, when we used to call him, he was known as Daisy Hill back then. When Georgie, his missus, used to hang out aboard saying, Damon, 26th. If my missus ever hang a bloody, I've chopped her fingers off. Don't you hang that bloody board out if that's where I am. It's like going to the second page on the monitor to see what your times are nowadays. Nobody wants to do that.
No, that's not one of the first page. That'll do. Tell me where I am. The difficulty, they were difficult times, and it's not something that I want to dwell on, but I think it's important for the listeners and the viewers because it's so much, we're so far away from it these days.
Well, I think things that you've said about equipment, airbags and so on and so forth, that makes a massive difference, obviously. I mean, mine were, we never had any protection. No. It was just leathers over skin. And the bits and pieces, the old...
There's no armour in it either. There's no SAE-approved armour.
No.
It was just a leather suit.
I remember the first time I wore a back protector. All it was a bit of foam stuffed down the back of my T-shirt.
Did Barry introduce the back protector? Was he credited with that?
There are various...
I can't remember.
I don't know whether he was or not. There were a few people that had got different ideas. I mean, the first time I saw a proper back protector was on Randy Mamola.
Okay.
And he crashed, coming out of the right hand, onto the straight at Jerez. No, that's wrong. Jarama. It was Madrid, just outside Madrid.
Yeah.
So, and he crashed coming out the corner. And we've all done a plug chop, remember them, at the end of the straight. That plug chop, for those of you younger than 50, because you had to take the plug out, take a look at the mix to see if you were carburetors back then. Do you remember carburetors? I do. And you check it anyway. So you'd have like half a dozen people all at the end of the straight. They've all done plug chops, waiting for the truck to come around to wheel your bike on to bring you back because you can't start it again. You've got to wait until you get back to check it out, the mixture out. And Randy crashed, and he went the full length of the straight on his back, and he came towards us like he was on the luge. And I thought, he is going to be a mess. On his back, and he got up, and his back was steaming, and he'd got this like crocodile back protector in. It's the first time I'd ever seen a proper back protector, and it saved him from the worst injury because skinning yourself is horrible. There you go. Back in the day, eh?
It's incredible. But when you look at the names that were in there, and I'm sure a lot of people who followed your commentary over the years have missed the fact of racing with Reg, with Roger Burnett, with Kenny Roberts, with Freddie, doing the transatlantic.
Well, you're jumping across eras as well there. I mean, like...
Yeah, we are a little bit, because it does, doesn't it? Because you start late 70s and you go through the early 80s, mid 80s, and the eras changed.
Well, Roger Burnett was 15 and worked for Reg.
Yeah, he was a mechanic.
Back in the day, he was a mechanic, a pretty boy mechanic. And I remember the first time I flew on an aeroplane, first time I'd ever been out of the country, was the AGV Nations Cup at Imola. And the only reason I went is because Mick Grant said that $2,000 or $2,500 wasn't enough start money. Mate, $2,500, that would have bought your house back then. So we went in his place. And of course, it was one of those situations where my mouth was open all the time. Like, I'm on an aeroplane. It was an Alitalia bloody flight out to Milan. And I remember Imola was like scary fast. You know, Tamburello, which is now Chicane.
Yeah.
That was on a TZ750, that was damn near flat. And you had to hang on. It was one of them. And I remember I'd always had a picture of Ron Aslam on my wall, even in my bedroom. You know, Ron Aslam on your bedroom wall. I mean, what? There's so many better pictures I could have had on my wall. But
God bless him.
And of course, I hardly knew Ron then.
Yeah.
But I couldn't get through the chicane in the way that I wanted to get through it. And so Ronnie, being the great guy that he is, he straightened it out. And in the next race, I beat him. I remember thinking, yeah. And that was how it was in those days. Everybody helped everybody else out. I've actually got a picture that someone put online of Graham McGregor in my... Sheene broke his shoulder, I think. So Graham McGregor subbed for him, an Australian, subbed for him in my leathers and Barry's helmet.
You could do anything you liked. Because you could. So take me back to that time when, the Podium first at the British Grand Prix on the 350.
Yeah, I mean,
That was a special time.
it was, because it was the British Grand Prix. And bearing in mind that, like now, Silverstone doesn't get used much.
No.
You know, it's not like Snetterton where you can go every other weekend or whatever it is, or Cadwell or any of the tracks we've got here. You know, Silverstone being the way it is, you know, you didn't run like you should. Yeah, you should have available test days and so on at Silverstone, but of course they don't, because Silverstone's a car track and they're really only interested in cars. Whatever anybody says, they're only really interested in cars.
Fully agree.
And you can understand why, because commercially that's where they make the money. But it was the first race meeting that my mum and dad had ever been to. STC Builders built that block, the low-level old, looks like a 1960s block of flats that's around the inside of Woodcote. Okay, they built that, all those. And part of the deal was that they built it and then they had a unit in it for free for however long. And STC Builders, they knew how to party, those boys. Bob and Dave, Bob Reynolds and Dave Leadsom it was, both dead now, sadly. They really knew how to party. And of course, buddy, finishing on the podium, Anton Mang won. I dive bombed Jean-Francois Baldet, his teammate. Last bend, last lap, stuffed it underneath him. He's still not forgiven me. To nick second place off of him, so the two factory Kawasaki's got split by a private Yamaha built in his shed in Wollaston, which was quite funny.
Which is super, but that was the catapult, wasn't it? You'd done national level racing, you'd won ACU, British Championship,
Yeah.
99. So the name was there, but then stand on the podium at a British Grand Prix in front of what were massive
It
crowds.
was 120,000 people then. Yeah, what has happened to the British Grand Prix? I know that it's expensive. I think that the viewing side of it is something that motorcycle supporters struggle with mostly, because there's not the banks there. You can't wander around. They've got grandstands, so you can't stand in front of the grandstands and watch where you want to watch from.
High up.
They try and make it.
And you're 100, sometimes 200 feet away from the track itself.
It's madness.
And with cars, yeah, you can get away with that. But
Well-
with motorcycles on the side, he's like, unsure, especially with teammates, you're not quite sure.
But half the excitement
difficult.
of it is being next to it,
Yeah,
to feel it. Someone like Mugello, where they're doing 225 mile an hour, and you stand by the side of the track in Mugello and you go, what the fuck?
But that's why I'm a motorcycle racing fan. At 5-6 years old at Cadwell Park in the late 70s, you could feel it. And that stayed with me. And 52 now, I'm still crackers about the sport.
Well, I mean, that never leaves you, which I'm fairly lucky. I always wondered whether I would fall out of love or fall away from our sport at any time. Not a bit of.
I don't think you can.
I still get up in the mornings and think about that. It's probably the second thought in my head. I won't tell you the first one. She's not here.
Answers on a postcard. Hence why I've been married so long.
Yeah, that's an amazing part of things.
Power to your elbow, Keith.
I'd tell you, yeah, as well. Yeah, I won't go there. I nearly did. Very nearly did.
The ladies behind.
Yeah, we are in a room full of ladies.
But from that point, that sort of pushed you forward in more and more into the British public's view.
I think that we were forever treading water.
Yeah.
Like paddling to keep ahead. We didn't really have any money, despite the fact what I've said earlier on. There was big money to be earned.
Yeah.
But I spent it. I spent everything we needed to do to make it right.
Yeah.
And I think that was, some people didn't. You know,
Well, you had to do that because you didn't have, at that point, a factory bike. So you had to spend as much as you could on a bike to make it competitive.
even factory bikes were a bloody problem because Suzuki never paid what they should have done. I remember 1983, I won the Motorcycle News Masters Series, which was, if you like, the de facto British Championship. Yeah. Everybody was in it to win it. And at the end of the year, they wouldn't pay for a set. The crankshafts had done their mileage. You know, in those days, you had to calculate everything by mileage because they don't last that long, two strokes. And they'd done their mileage. And Brands Hatch, we had the final round at Brands Hatch. And you want to finish the season, with a bang.
Absolutely.
And
Which in the window for the following year.
they didn't want to pay.
Wow.
So we got them done and then wouldn't give them a road buy back until they paid for them.
It's fair.
And Dennis Rowan, who was managing director of Suzuki back in the day, who ended up running Silverstone for a while and then other bits and pieces. I don't think he's with us anymore, Dennis. How close-knit are we really? Dennis and Carol Rowan, as was back in the day, me and my then partner, Carolyn, had their oven in our house. It wasn't just bikes that got swapped about, it was kitchen utilities as well.
And does that, what? Okay. That's different.
Well, we need an oven, and I happened to mention it in his row, and the next thing I got an oven.
And there it's arrived.
He was moving into a new posh house, and his oven was free. Really bizarre.
It's a bizarre time, of its time again. That's what, but people helping each other out. That's what the sport was about back then.
Biggest disaster for Dennis Rowe was when the bloody his fridge packed up in his office and the whiskey got warm. It's funny, whenever, nightmare.
Nobody needs warm whiskey.
When I'd go to Suzuki, Suzuki, by the way, this is pre-M25. This is before the M25 was built. So you had to go through the centre of London. I loved it. When I got my van in all the way through Lewisham and on the curbs and cutting up Rolls Royces and all the rest of it through Park Lane. It was perfect. But it took you quite a long time to get to Croydon to where Suzuki was back in the day. And they were at Crawley actually by then. They'd gone away from Beddington Lane. They'd moved to Crawley by the time Dennis Rowan was running things. But of course, as soon as I'd arrived there to do a deal with Dennis, who was the managing director, Sheene had turned up.
Right.
He lived around the corner of Charlwood.
He did.
And he had spies. So he knew as soon as I'd turned up to do a deal, hello, mate. He'd come bounding in like the old puppy. Hello, mate, how you doing? And then he'd sit there, plonk, and you couldn't do the deal. So you'd driven all that bloody way to do a deal with the boss, and you couldn't get anything concluded because Barry was now sat. He knew what he was at. He was checking out. He was such a shrewd bugger, Barry was. He knew the way the game worked. And of course, good old bloody couldn't chuck him out.
No.
Because Barry was best mates with Gerald Ronson, who owned...
Oh, he owned the whole thing, didn't he?
The whole lot. It was Heron. Heron was Gerald's.
Yeah. Then you became teammates, didn't you?
Yeah.
Tell me about that story.
It's an interesting one. Frank and Iris, Barry's mum and dad, looked after me and Carolyn. Carolyn was, I think, 16 then when we first went out to Grand Prix. And Frank and Iris were really good to us. We didn't have a clue. It was pre-sat-nav and everything else. So you're working off a map to go around. It was only a European Championship, the Grand Prix back in the day. You didn't go to Australia and Japan and all like it is now. And you had no food. You had no clue how to buy food. You didn't speak any languages. You couldn't find your way where you were going. You got toll roads. You got bloody this, that, and the other. All the kind of things that you, as a youngster you had no clue about. Frank and Iris always used to look after us. They were brilliant for that. And Barry was pretty good with me then, but becoming his teammate is an instant threat. And what you got to remember is I was on the up ramp at that time, and Barry had hurt himself badly. He'd had that big crash at Silverstone, which meant that we used to go and see him because he was at Three Shires Hospital, which is a private hospital that's next to Northampton General here in Northampton. So he was in our manor, so we would go and see him and so on. And Linda Davies, who was Steve Parrish's partner back in the day, Carolyn, my then missus was friendly with her, and Stephanie Sheene, obviously. They had this pecking order in the paddock, and of course Stephanie was like the model come everything, and then Linda, then there was the Sale brothers who had their wives in the paddock as well. So there was this female fraternity back then was quite powerful. Behind every fast man is a very fast woman. So Barry and I got on well, right to the point where we were teammates. Then it became difficult. The first Grand Prix that I basically went quite well at, which was Le Mans, the first foreign Grand Prix. We were summoned the very same week. My truck that Heron Suzuki provided, they provided all the spares, they provided the bikes at that time as well. But we ran it out of Northamptonshire. Paul Bolton, who's still working on two strokes now, Paul Bolton, minus hair now, but he's still doing all the builds for people around. If you want a classic Grand Prix bike building, then Paul's your man for that. He worked for me then, and they demanded to have all the bikes back, and half my spares went off the truck. I've got no clue why. And they emptied the side tanks of avgas. It all disappeared. And I'm convinced, I might be paranoid, but I'm convinced it's because Barry, I kicked his ass at Le Mans, and the shit hit the fan. And from that point onwards, it became quite a sticky subject. Barry was recovering from a badly broken leg. There's no way I have disrespect for Barry. Not at all. He was the man was a genius back in the day. He was the Valentino Rossi at the time, both personality-wise and performance-wise.
And what he did for motorcycle racing in general for the UK.
Worldwide.
Well, for worldwide, but from a UK perspective.
Same as Valentino.
Same as Valentino did back in his time.
I'm sure that the Valentino will have looked at the Barry Sheene example.
Of course.
Because he's such a smart kid.
Of course.
As we all did. You know,
I mentioned it, everybody tried to emulate him, even me on my little BMX, and it was all there. Everybody wanted to be Barry Sheene.
But he was a shrewd operator, a little bit manipulative. Behind the scenes, you had to be quite careful. You know, he had his fingers in every aspect of the paddock. Like he'd say to me, "Let me know what my mechanics are saying." You know, it was a situation where he had his fingers on all the pulse in the paddock. He was a star, a superstar. You know, he wasn't just a motorcycle star, he was a superstar.
Transcended the sport, didn't he?
He did, absolutely. But sadly, 52 years old. March the 10th, I very rarely remember birthdays and stuff.
How old am I?
52. Yeah. Exactly.
That's right. Barry Sheene was 52, George Michael was 53. You just go like, hang on a minute.
That's what I feel like. I look at Reg, thank God for Roger.
Soon to be 73, I think he is.
Unbelievable. I'm into his 70th, him and Emma. Emma's 50th, his 70th, and what a party up in Cleethorpes.
Superb.
I love a bit of...
At the number one?
Yeah, I love a pub party. And that was...
They're the best.
Well, it was with it. And he's been... If you remember the old Motorcycle News Night with the Stars thing that he used to have in London at the Lyceum. Lyceum, sticky floors, you know, proper tacky old place. But it was like the best thing. And Reg would be on the dance floor giving it all he'd got. I mean, he
still does now.
Yeah, I know.
Anything that comes up the Who, with all the rocks, all the late 70s rock, that's his thing. And then they'd say the Yardbirds, he's going to love that. He's going to be so chuffed with that. But that time, it was you partied because it was still that.
He might not be here next week. Yeah.
For want of a better way of looking at it, it was still like fighter pilot. It was let's go and race because we don't know what's going to happen. We're going to go and do it. So we're going to party hard off track and we'll race hard on it.
And you did.
Yeah.
And it was that kind of fights in the paddock. I mean, it was a lifestyle that you didn't realise you were living at the time. I mean, I wish I'd been more awake back then so that I could have maximised just how much fun it was.
Is a question I ask regularly about people being in the moment for something, but you're not. As a motorcycle racer or a mechanic or a teamer, all you are looking at is the next session, the next race weekend, where you're going to be next. You don't take the time out to literally to smell the roses or the whiskey or whatever it is that's being
You just do,
around.
you do what you do, and that's it. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned concentration there. I got stopped by the police many times, but I got stopped by the police on this occasion, driving somewhere or the other, and they stopped me and said, "Where are you going, sir?" And I said, "Cadwell Park in Lincolnshire." He looked at me. He said, "How are you going to Cadwell Park in Lincolnshire then?" And I thought about it. I'm on my way to Snetterton because in my head, I've been thinking about 2 weeks ahead, not about the weekend that I was about to do. It was the week further on. I was thinking about gearing and stuff like that.
That's funny you're on the A14 and not the A46.
A14 weren't built.
Was it not?
Nah, A14 hasn't been there. It was the A11.
Oh,
out
of course.
out to Snetterton.
Yeah.
See, you're 52.
I know.
You're behind the game.
I am. I'm well behind the game in a lot of things, Keith. You know that. Tell me the story of... You recounted it over breakfast, but please tell that story again about Neil Mackenzie.
Oh, well, I mean, there are certain things that you should, when you're on tour, they should stay on tour. However, I'll share this one with you. It was, we were at Salzburg, which is one of the most dangerous tracks. It's where I had the biggest crash I'd ever had in my life. But before that, we were on a night out. Salzburg is a really odd track to get to. Like, you can spend your time going round and round the roads at the top before you can find a way into this spiral. But there's a hotel and a pretty good bar, which we found. And the night progressed into a situation where Kenny Roberts, bearing in mind that everybody's racing this weekend, he's in the corner, standing on his head, trying to drink a pint uphill, which is pretty remarkable in itself. He was quite successful.
I can't even imagine to try that. Don't try that at home, kids. It's 2025. You're not allowed to do that.
But Neil Mackenzie, he always had a strange thing about getting his kit off, Neil. you could quite often find him running around in female underwear in the paddock. And that could be here in the UK. But on this particular occasion, somehow, I don't know how it actually came about, but he decided to swap clothes with this guy that was in lederhosen. So Neil turns up, all of a sudden comes running through the bar in lederhosen, and the bloke comes behind him in piss-stained Y-fronts that were obviously Neil's. And this was how the evening went on. So time to leave. Christian Idden's dad, Paul, it was his van, and we're all piled into the front of this double-decked Fiat van, and can't find Mackenzie. So driving around the car park, and there's a light swing round, come to this Mercedes with a body on top of it, and it's Mackenzie, stark bollock naked, looking through his legs at us. Door opens, he jumps in, he's laid on the dashboard, like in all his glory. And I'll tell you how long ago it was. One of the girls was trying to flick his willy with a C90 cassette. I do remember that.
This is why we do podcasts. These are the stories that that
Mackenzie's not going to thank me for that, and Jan probably a whole load less.
No, probably not, but it's fine. But they'll easily forgive it.
That night with the stars, you see, you used to meet everybody. That's where quite often people. I remember when Neil first came out with Jan at the time. You know, like it's the girlfriends and wives of the past.
One of the most enduring relationships in motorcycle racing.
They're around, you know. I mean, it's quite funny how those kind of things. I mean, Neil Mackenzie is the only man I can think of presently, or in our era particularly, that I can't find anybody that's got a bad word to say. Not that I'm looking, but no, I can't find anybody.
Within our paddock and within conversation, somebody says something.
Yeah, and there is nothing. Neil Mackenzie and his boys, by the way, both of them, Taron and Taz, they're just nice people. But that goes back to the very early days. But
because their dad's done it all for them, so they don't have to.
You could find Neil in a closet full of female clothing. He just lumped it in there.
I'm due back with him at some point because he's moved now, hasn't he? He's moved house, so I've left him alone a little bit just to get the house settled. But we're definitely due back with him for some stories.
Well, I saw him down at the bike show, obviously the NEC, and while I was having a go at Hodgie for never ringing me. It's funny when that
has he rung you yet?
Who, Hodgie?
Yeah.
Hodgie is today's man. He's today's man. Like, it's quite funny. The philosophy of life for Neil Hodgson. Bearing in mind he's Roger Burnett trained. Yes. So JT and Roger Burnett were obviously a partnership, and Hodgie as well. He brought him on. Roger's done some great job. You know, two world champions he brought on. So he knows what he's at. Hodgie once said to me, I don't see why you ever do anything that's not going to benefit. Like if, for instance, Twitter, X, why do you respond? Why are you going to respond? There's no benefit to you in that. Why are you going to get involved in an argument? There's no benefit in it. And the same thing about life. He has a finite amount of time. All of us have a finite amount of time. So you use it to your maximum ability and to your maximum benefit. It's a very selfish way of carrying on.
Yes.
But Hodgie is today's broadcaster. I have no benefit to him anymore. So it's very unusual for him to return my call. Now, it'll be interesting. It's funny, I had this conversation with Charlie Iscott the other day. Now he's dropped off the edge. He said, I bet Hodgie does that to me as well. Doesn't ring me up out of the blue.
And it's just a mindset.
It's a mindset. It's that racer mindset. It's moving forward. It's not looking back. It's about going forward.
It's not personal. They're just moving forward.
Exactly that.
It's just, now we moved on to something else. Now we move on to something else.
It sounds horrible, but it is the way that life is, particularly in the broadcast world, and to a great extent in the paddock.
Multiple people do it. It happens on a regular basis.
I was just thinking of a Roger Burnett story. Roger Burnett, it was quite well renowned for trying to get off with everyone's girlfriend back in the day. He was a bugger. He might still be. And I wrote, every time I came into the garage at Silverstone, he was chatting Carolyn up. So the third time I came in, I pulled up a long time and said, if you're in here next time, what do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean?
Keith, don't be like that. Exactly. But as it is, please don't be in here next time I arrive.
There were no pleas about it, I can tell you.
It's when you look back, you look at the road racing side of things, of Scarborough, the Northwest, and the TT.
how did you approach? Because at that point, you almost had to do them because sometimes they were part of the British Championship. They played well.
Yeah, you're right.
That's why you go racing.
You're right on both fronts. I don't know why, but my racing was all about feel, everything. There was hardly any calculation to it. I mean, I was good at setting a motorbike up. That was a fact. But the way that the thing felt was so important. I never saw furniture, the stuff by the side of the track. Scarborough. I remember one time coming down the hill at Scarborough, about the third jump, before it had chicanes and all that Mickey Mouse stuff. And Sheene was dawdling around in the middle of the track. And I remember I landed, and there's nothing you can do when you're in the air. And I landed next to him, nearly took his ear roll off. He weren't best pleased, to say the least. But it was a track that I was fast on for some reason or another. We never went back there after Smarty was killed. When Neil Robinson was killed, we never went back. And I remember Pete Illaby, who ran it, I said, sorry, mate, I can't return. No, because it is too bloody dangerous. There's too much stuff to hit. But I won the Gold Cup and everything. It's quite funny. Sometimes somebody will show a picture of a trophy and my name will be on it. I can't remember winning it. I've never really lived in the past. It's only when I do something like this where someone reminds me, which is why this is probably slightly disjointed. We drop backwards and forwards because it's as you jog my memory, stuff comes out. Northwest was the same. I went to the Northwest. Again, good old Roger. Roger showed me the way round and then got so pissed the night before, I didn't have to race against him, which worked quite well. I went to the Northwest. There's not a lot really to learn there, but mate, when you're doing nearly 190 mile an hour as it was back then, on a thing with 29mm forks and tyres that want to explode in a minute and lose the treads and all the rest of it, and you are like, you get to the end of the straight and you've held your breath for like the last minute because you've been flat out and your helmet has moved up over your mouth and under your nose. I had to drill the front of it so I could get some air through. And the brakes, like you get to down into Port Rush and you hit the brakes and the forks would bend that much, it would rub the radiator. That bloody you'd never gone that fast anywhere. You couldn't hold it as far.
Because that was a flat run from Coleraine.
It didn't have anywhere. It was from Coleraine. I mean, there was no chicanes.
That's about it.
You got two chicanes, but they're not there.
It's like little left at the top. Well, you drop down to Metropole. You had the run to town. That's it.
You had Mathers Cross, which is where Robert was killed.
Sorry, not Margaret. Yeah, Mathers Cross, where they've got the chicane now.
Well, that was where Robert was killed. Dunlop.
Yes.
Terrible. But won the race, took home a load of money, met loads of women, and a new lap record. Thank you very much. I never went back.
1 for 1. You only did it once, didn't you?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I was a rookie. I just did it that one time, won the Northwest.
Won it and then came home.
It's the only trophy I've got hanging on the wall.
Is it?
It's the only one. Because it was one of those, it was a surreal situation. You turn up there, to start with, it was in the middle of the Troubles, or at the end of the Troubles, it happens. So everywhere you went, there were guys in green jackets with machine guns, which were a bit, we don't see that in the UK, apart from in Northern Ireland, as was. But the contrast to that was fantastic people.
Oh, absolutely.
I love being in Ulster. Ulster is the only place where an Essex boy can use his sense of humour because everybody rips you a new one. It's like one of those places. I remember Pippa Laverty is married to Eugene Laverty. We were talking about the Essex and Ulster sense of humour. And she said, first time I went there, she said, they made me cry.
She's a northeastern girl.
And she's got well, she can look after herself, let's put it that way.
She can.
But the sense of humour is quite
it is.
Quite quick, quite cruel, which is why I love being there as well. I mean, we've just done the Belfast Bike Awards that I do every January. And it's just it's like going a little bit back in time with a sense of humour that you can still get away with. Michael Dunlop, up on stage.
I thought his speech was outstanding. On many levels.
When he said he was going to bum off his buddy sponsor because he
not that way. Not like some of you short circuit race. It's like, okay, thanks, Michael.
Politically correct, not. Went down quite well.
He did. I was watching it on YouTube, and it just superb. And for Mike Swan.
Do you know what? Actually, yeah, great. And Scott, his son. Scott was really good, and he dressed well. But I think the great thing about YouTube is there isn't this regulation. If we move into the television thing, I mean, the biggest blow that I found with television was how it became more and more watered down, more and more restrictive as to what you could say, and your personality. They didn't want a personality. They want a straightforward commentary in my particular case. But I was always transgressing their rules one way or another. I mean, you'd have compliance that would ring you in the week. Oh dear. And then they had the compliance course, the what's the one they call it nowadays? I can't remember the exact name of it now, but there was always the diversity and inclusion course, the unconscious bias course, and then there was the environmental thing that you had to do so that they could get their Albert Award. I always thought an Albert Award was when you had some jewellery through the head of your dick. but the Albert Award is an environmental thing where you get points for drinking out of a stainless steel cup and not using a plastic bottle, and if you encourage a stainless steel straw, you've got to make it sustainable. And yet here we are travelling around the world on dirty great aircraft, 26 of us as was for the BT team back in the day, ploughing out whatever you're ploughing out, and you're at a Grand Prix using fuel. And there we are trying to get this Albert Award.
On average of 30 bikes per grid, doing hundreds of laps a weekend.
So BT can get their little Albert Award thing in the corner of their credits to tick that box. This virtue signalling world that we live in is like a nightmare for the likes of me and many others. And I believe the silent majority.
It's what it's all about. I agree completely. The comedian we had on stage here last night, they've still got the jonglers.
What are they called? Jongleurs. It's a stirrup cup. It's a group of...
The background is what I was looking for.
Stand-up comedians. They have them here every Monday or every other Monday.
Do you know what I'm going to do?
No, you're going to chuck that out. Do you know what? I do that when I do interviews.
Your first bit done, that's all right. We're going to talk a bit more on that.
I used to prep for them. I used to prep like hell for them and then think, what the fuck am I doing? And
because I'll never come to an interview blind. It helps us have a little bit of form.
You've got to.
But then you just suddenly go,
well,
yeah, nah.
There are people in the world. I can think of Greg Haynes and JT, James Toseland. I mean, JT, when he's had a beer in him, is the most loose animal you've ever come across.
Sure.
But nobody knows JT the way we know JT. And that is such a shame because he is such an incredible personality. Sharp brain, sharp wit, funny. But he's in today's world where he's thinking too much almost. He's spending too much time working on. Greg Haynes takes a wad of paperwork this
Super
thick.
holders.
Just how can you do that? It's very, very difficult to you can't remember everything.
No.
I think that in later years, Jules and I, obviously we're of a certain age, and whereas Jules he's got all the facts, he bangs them out like this. As he got older, he didn't. And that's where our partnership worked really well because I'd be blathering on like a lunatic, as I always did. And Jules would have a chance to have the thought, quickly check it, put it out there, and it would be accurate. But even in later years, you begin to doubt whether what you're about to say or what you're thinking is as accurate as you need it to be. And as racing, as we've already talked about, has become more intense and more exact and more precise, so has broadcasting, which means that the kind of mistakes that the Murrayisms, the Murray Walker scenario,
Holman Ball's books that used to be,
you'd get away with.
Yeah.
You won't now. And with social media being as cruel as it is, and some of them bullets get through, even to the thickest skinned people. I've gone to a point where if it's about me personally, goes with the territory.
Yeah.
But there was one guy I remember that just swung a little bit towards the family. So I thought, okay, buddy. So we did no, not just have it on bloody social media. I don't deal in that way.
Excellent.
So I looked this guy up and I worked out where he lived and all the rest of it. And then I fired back at him and said, if you want to meet me in the street outside number so-and-so, so-and-so, I'm quite happy to have this discussion with you face to face. He went off social media. It all went completely. He was probably in his back bedroom with his mum.
Yeah.
But his words are just as cruel as someone, of course.
And you don't forget them because you can still recount them now.
Yeah, and there are certain areas where you shouldn't be going to. When it becomes a family situation, can't remember what he said. It probably wasn't that bad. I probably overreacted, but I do overreact. So it was one of those.
It's personal though, Keith. You can't, when it becomes personal, you have to react. If it's a constructive complaint about how I do an interview, how I talk, or if I talk over somebody, or the way I deliver a question, whatever. I can deal with that. I'm not in the creative scheme of that. I'm not a trained professional.
And it's of its time myself. Don't you think it's of its time? I mean, if you go back, I listened to a commentary the other day, and somebody sent me a YouTube clip of me winning one at Donington. I'd completely forgotten about it. As I said to you earlier, I don't remember half the things that I've done in the past when it comes to racing. It was an era before. So until someone jogs my memory, I can't remember it. Anyway, this thing came up. To start with, it was the piss poor quality of the footage, because it was old school cameras. Everybody's miles away. You can't really see who they are. I know who they are because I went, we were there with them. And the commentary was appalling. And you could tell that the commentator didn't really know who any of the riders were at the time.
There's nothing.
If you'd done anything like that now, you'd be slaughtered. You've only got to get bloody hell, a wheel size wrong and everybody's going for you.
Yeah, because that's social media, isn't it? They're quick to show the negative. I mean, we're quite fortunate with the podcast. People are very complimentary of what we do on YouTube and things like that. But from a commentary point of view, nobody will say you did a great job. But as soon as you step out of line with something that's said, boom, straight on.
Which is why I like YouTube, and that's what I was getting to. The fact is, YouTube is like the old days. You can say what you like and pretty much get away with whatever you want to get away with. And people that are probably tuning in because they're proper fans.
Yeah.
You're going to get people that probably don't agree with some of the things we say. That's fine. That's what the comment section's for, by the way.
That's exactly right.
Get on it.
Yeah, it is.
But it's a thing that I think YouTube. I think the way that we consume stuff is going to be more and more towards that.
But also, 65% and more of our audience, both visual and audio, 45 plus.
Yeah.
There's a silent majority for a lot. And they love what we talk about.
The worry
understand it.
The worry about it is that when you do a stage show, for instance, somewhere like Silverstone, the British Grand Prix, all you can see is flat caps, bald heads, and grey hair.
But it is. That's the way it's going.
But the problem with that is,
way of it.
When that has got to a point where that's evolved into I don't go to race meetings anymore, we're not bringing through the youngsters. I've always advocated that I don't understand why Silverstone don't do it. Start with anybody blue light in for free.
Yep.
Straight away, you've got
armed forces discount. Everything. Throw everything at it.
Kids free.
Yeah.
Bring them all in. Do you remember, there used to be they did a Formula Renault day at Silverstone. I think they had 100,000 people there. It was a free day. You just had to get your ticket to a Renault dealership.
Perfect.
And they turned up. All the concessions are happy. Everybody, the bars are happy. Everyone selling hot dogs is happy. Ripping you off, but they're all happy. But the point is that somehow I don't know how Silverstone haven't got it. Consistently every year.
He's doing that. It's on a decline for Silverstone for attendances. We also haven't got a British chance of a world champion in MotoGP class. And for me, that's going to be 5, 6, maybe more years away at the moment. We don't know how Scott's going to develop. We don't know how Eddie's going to develop. We already see, is it Manu Brinton that's already gone to Spanish Stock 6? So he's out of the prototype run already.
Well, it's full.
The Sully Mountsie is the next one. You just think, well,
the pattern is full.
Yeah.
If you look across the Italian and the Spanish championship,
there's no room, is there? There's no room at the inn.
You're going to find yourself in a situation where legislation has got to allow for nationalities that are into there, and that's going to be down to Dorna at the end of the day. Bradley Smith. His father Alan took him over there as well. It's great cost involved is huge.
So Scott Redding, Danny Kent, all a huge amount of expense to the parents to get them over there. Charlie Nesbitt tried it. He went over there for a huge amount of money.
And there was me on my £2,000 TZ350 finishing on the podium at Silverstone. Yeah, that is the contrast, of course, at the end of the day.
And that's where the sport is at the minute. And it's a difficult situation. It's like I brought my daughter into it. She loves the sport. She's got a rider as a boyfriend. She's happy in the.
Oh dear.
She's done all right. It's okay. He's a good lad. There are some where you would have gone, really? But this one's all right. He's a good lad. And you just, without that, and you look at a BSB meeting and you say the same thing. And the motorcycle industry in general, the people that can afford motorcycles, there's no AR50s, there's no TZ125s, there's no RGV 250s as there was when I was a kid growing up and what my mates were riding. That's when it was attracted into the sport, because you'd ride to Cadwell from Gainsborough, you go to Donington Park, and now there isn't that market. So the kids aren't getting into bike racing. They go through Barry Sheene or Valentino Rossi or whoever. And it's a big downhill push. I don't know how we turn it around.
You only turn it around through investment at the end of the day, and it's got to come from the tracks. It's got to come from MSVR. You know, I remember Palmer when he first had the first bike meeting. There was a load of row about that you didn't want to pay for the generators that you needed at Brands Hatch at the early round because they cost whatever they cost, and that the power supply at Brands has always been notoriously poor, and you needed generators to back it up so everybody got what they needed. And he didn't want to pay for it. In the end, he did. And then he had 30-odd thousand people that turned up, and JP got his chest out, and it was like, and never had any trouble with generator costs after that. And I think that, you know, unfortunately, there's a lot of money turned over in BSB particularly, but very little bit of it is filtering back to the grassroots and to the teams that need it the most to bring it on. If you go back to MotoGP, which is where we're all sort of aiming at the end of the day. Go back to MotoGP, and Dorna paid, I think it was double the amount of money for the privateer teams. Their travel fund was double what it was for the factory teams. Because the fact is, without the privateer teams, you didn't have a grid. No.
You got 12 riders and that's it. That's
so that was the way around it went. And the same thing, really, we need in our sport. We need to promote the youngsters coming through, and they need funding. I'm a bit of an advocate. In fact, we're in Chris's pub, Chris Herring's pub. And I remember Chris saying, why don't we have midweek evening races in the summer at Silverstone?
Perfect.
Yeah.
It's a great idea.
I always thought it was a great idea.
That's a great idea. I never even considered that because it's a weekend thing. But from May to September, it's light till 9 o'clock. Why not? Any racer.
Everybody can come in for free to watch. I mean, the promotion that you can have in that situation. But there you go. It's just an idea that will be thrown out the window because Silverstone won't want to do it because they've got to pay staff. It's a huge venue. So staff-wise, their staffing is bigger than anywhere else.
But if you did it at Donington or Cadwell or Stetterton, somewhere like that, people would still turn up.
Yeah, I don't think JP's probably into that. He's a bit more... I think the lost leader thing needs to come from both of those guys. I think Jonathan Palmer and his group, Silverstone and their group. And now we run into the insurance problems a la Shaky. You know, the fact, what happened at Snetterton, Shaky hurting himself.
What are your thoughts on that, Keith?
Should have been done out of court. My thoughts are Shaky and JP and their insurers should have been together, worked it out privately. Look at the Barry Sheene thing at Silverstone. Yeah. Sheene got relocation money out of that when he had that massive offer at Abbey. But the fact was that they dealt with that and you never heard any more about it. I'm surprised that it went to the stage it went to court. The insurers obviously believed that they were going to win, otherwise they wouldn't have been funding it. It would have been down more than Jonathan Palmer. It would have been probably down, I'm guessing here, I don't know, down to the insurers who would have decided they wanted to fight it rather than roll over with an out-of-court settlement for Shaky. The amounts, huge amounts, but the knock-on effect surely will be not perhaps race meetings, because I think they'll probably cater for the insurance costs, but your track days. Track days, now you're going to have air fences up for track days and so on and so forth. So suddenly, maybe next year, 2025, we're on January 5, I suspect that there will be insurance issues moving forward because of the Shaky syndrome. Whether you believe Shaky was right to do it or not, he doesn't give a toss. At the end of the day, I think he's covered himself by saying, well, it's to make the sport safer. Bullshit. It's just a huge amount of cash that he's managed to pull out of it for his retirement. Would you have done it? Probably. He was quite within his rights to do it. His injuries are much more severe than I think people are giving him credit for.
There are still
he's lasting problems,
with it now.
We
didn't talk about it.
No,
he did with us at the podcast 18 months ago that we did with him back up in...
You can refer back to that podcast then, because absolutely, we all know what's going on with it still, and it ain't pleasant at the end of the day. He's still suffering with it. So should he not? I mean, if you go back to the last big insurance claims that I can remember, Jim Moody.
Yeah.
Jim Moody was one that managed to... Jim was always clever. He always insured himself up to the hilt, Jim did. So he got it fairly well covered. And then he went to a gym with a piece of equipment that broke and broke his leg again in a gym. Mind you, if you knew the way Jim Moody trained, you realise why. He's an animal. An animal.
Which, with Ian, who was with us last night, he asked me the question on the table just at the back there, who's turned us down for an interview on the podcast? And I turned to you and I said, Rob Mack was one. that he just won't return.
Oh, I'm amazed at that, actually.
I think I must have offended him somehow. I don't know. I genuinely don't know.
Well, he wouldn't talk to me if it was the case. And he still does.
And also Jim Moody. Jim's happy under the radar.
He is. I mean, he
was courteous. He just said, look, it's not for me. There's too much water to go under the bridge. He's happy, and he's between here and Florida, or Scotland and Florida anyway.
Yeah.
I get kudos on Strava from him. That's as close as we get.
Yeah, he's a man that trains to the Mick Doohan level.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've never known anybody he's not a man to mess with. Little story. So there always used to be a
Jim Moody story.
There used to be a disco after Donington Park. We'd always have a disco back then. Excuse my terminology for those of you who don't understand what it is.
Last night, didn't he?
Yeah, but he was old like me. But it was quite funny. So we got this disco thing, and the girl I was with, the big old bouncer, he gave her a bit of a nudge and wouldn't let us in.
Yeah.
So while we're debating it, suddenly this flash comes from stage left. Jim Moody has got this bloke about 3 times the size of him. He's got him round the neck, and this guy's wiping him on the wall, and he's trying to knock him out, and he's trying to get to him, and he can't get to him. And Jim choked him till he went down. This big geezer. Don't you fucking do that to fucking meet you. Jim, he's only 5'2", but he'll take on people bigger than him. He is the original honey badger.
Yeah, obviously, we give that to Cal, didn't you? Yeah. Did you christen him that?
No, I think it came from, who was the bloody Australian Formula One driver as well. I think he was another one that was known as the honey badger for some reason or another.
Ah, okay.
But I think it's kind of,
anybody who's really
I'd love to claim it, but I think I repeated it.
I couldn't remember. I don't know if it was you or not. But when you and Jules got together and you first started your commentary, from being polar opposites in terms of everything, you're right, but opposites attract.
Funny enough, Jules and I'm probably just right of centre. He's left of centre when it comes to the old politics thing.
Yeah.
We don't Jules and I have got a very similar outlook in that we don't see it in blue and red, left and right. We see it as what is reasonable.
Yes.
And if you can argue it reasonably, then you win. And there's no argument about it at the end of the day. You can't fight with each other because we're friends. So you have this argument. Jules and I will always start polar opposites, miles apart, but we always have managed to come together in agreement. I hope this is correct, Jules. We've always managed to come together. One or the other has conceded. Usually it's me who's conceded to him because he has usually a much more intelligent argument than I've got. I want to hit him, but I can't. But it's always been great fun with Jules over the way that we see things. And the same thing, commentary, sometimes I've been harder on him than I should have been. But we always work it out in the hire car afterwards. The ones that always used to piss me off, and this is what I'm saying, talk about the intelligence of the man. I'd be driving home from, say, Sky's studio or whatever it is. That was a good show, wasn't it? And slowly but surely, you know how it goes over in your head. This interview will go over in your head when you're driving home. And it goes over and you go, hang on a minute. And you realise 100 miles up the road that he took a massive piss take out of me and I haven't realised.
How long did it take you to realise that it was going to be something good? We talked about certain commentary duos that take a little bit of time to gel, but in this modern world, it's really obvious when it doesn't in early days. But for you guys together, being so opposite and coming together and being such an iconic partnership, and it is, you look through the comments, it's not me blowing smoke for you and Jules. You see it in the comments under Jules, and when people knew we were coming down to talk about this today, there's a huge affinity for you both in the world of commentary.
I think the one thing that both he and I have together is passion for the sport.
Yeah.
We're not trying to score points for each other, for ourselves.
You can't do that.
It's people do, and you'll find that jobbing presenters, jobbing commentators, they just move through the sports to somewhere else. And they get found out in the end. The problem is that in broadcasting, people get used to whatever they get used to. So sometimes if the time that you notice how bad a commentary or how bad a presentation is when somebody comes in that actually knows what they're on about. It's funny, I was watching Sarah Elgin, blonde girl, Welsh, that presents the Six Nations.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, I love her. I don't know her. And I'm not a big rugby fan. But the way she presents rugby with the passion she has and the knowledge she has. And you get a lot of things where they say, well, just ticking a box with a woman. In some cases, I'd agree with that. 100%. Yeah. Well, me and you are in agreement with that. And that's because we're passionate about our sport. Yeah. As soon as you get a box ticker, some woke bleeding producer has managed to slot this, because she is of a certain denomination, or he, in some respects. Yeah. But Sarah is brilliant. And I love that passion. And I think that's the thing. Sport is passion. As soon as you try and squash it and even it out. I mean, Jules left the stage a couple of years before I did. And I think ostensibly because the travel was quite hectic for him. But I think that also he was getting the same vibe as I was getting. Slowly but surely it was being strangled. Slowly but surely we were being eased down. And the people that were at the head of BT Sport at the time, nice enough people, but absolute bleeding shiny bums. All they did is polish up a chair with their arse all day long, and bean counting all the way. And in the end, I think what happened with BT Sport is they ended up with a much cheaper production, as in cost, because Jules and I were probably quite expensive by today's standards. I think that the cost of presenters, cost of commentators has come down hugely. I got paid very well for a great number of years, and thank you very much to everybody who did. And BT Sport as well. I mean, but BT Sport had a huge turnover of people. It started off with a fellow called Grant Best, who wasn't the best liked man, but he was a producer. He came from Sky originally, and he particularly liked what Jules and I did. So bang, me and Jules were in. Toby Moody, Steve Parrish, were out. Yeah. And Jules and I were back on the scene. And to be absolutely honest, our first couple of performances, mine particularly, was shite. Okay. I needed to get back up to speed, and I wasn't up to speed. And the way that I bloody compensated for that was I was aggressive with Julian, which was hugely funny to those that were, people just died laughing. And poor old Jules, he had to put up with this. I remember having to go at him about his teeth, and it was terrible, really, when I think about it. And I have to apologise profusely, and as I did to Jules. But after our first commentary, when we came back, I remember driving back to the hotel. I always drive, and said, "You don't seem very happy, mate." He said, "I'm not really." I said, "Okay, we'll try it a different way the next day." So the next day we did it the way that he wanted to do it. And we drove back the next day. He said, "You don't look very happy, mate." I said, "I'm not. I can't do it like that." So we had to kind of meet in the middle and get ourselves back together.
Bit of give and take, though. It's part and part. It's a partnership.
But we walked in to the very first commentary in the very first programme that BT Sport put out for MotoGP without any clue about who was even going to speak first. It had never been discussed. They basically put two chairs in front of two microphones and said, "There you go, boys." And it literally was as bad as that.
Wow.
With Sky, you went back to the World Superbike days.
Yes.
We had a fella called Martin Turner. Martin Turner won a BAFTA for his rugby coverage. Martin Turner was a superstar producer, is a superstar producer. And we had the benefit of his wonderful sight to bring us both on professionally. And I learned more from Martin Turner than anybody else in broadcasting. And it's just a great shame now that the kind of producers that we have are generally freelancers. So they're in fear of their job. So they are frightened of letting you go too far down that personality ramp that I go on about. And if you went too far down that personality ramp, that would reflect on them as the producer. And because they're a freelancer, they could be let go and someone else could be brought in. And the whole thing around broadcasting at the moment is pretty much based on fear. Cameramen, sound men, peripheral people that work, that rely on that for their livelihood, are kind of very careful of what they say and what they do, even in the bar. You put the word wrong in the bar and it gets around to the wrong people. And you'll have facilities managers that are listening. You'll have people back at base that are listening. Your microphone is open into the full offices and circle that are plugged into that circuit. It might not be going out live, but your microphone is live. It'll be like we're
always somebody listening.
Always somebody listening. And it could be on the other side of the world.
Yeah.
That are tuned into that ring, if you like, of coverage. And so it's become very, very tight and very, very regulated and very sensitive. You can offend anybody at any time.
It's still a choice to be offended, though, isn't it? Well, sadly, it's such a quick choice to be offended these days.
I think that what you've ended up with a lot more vanilla. I mean, personally, I think Gavin Emmett, let's use Gavin Emmett. He's the guy who replaced me.
Yes.
Gavin Emmett, very well educated. Him and Matt Roberts both came up through Dorna. They did. Matt, you'll be familiar with. So they both came up through Dorna. So they were Dorna bred, which is, to start with, a generic platform. It's a world feed situation, which means that you can't be on the side of any particular rider or any particular country or any particular anything. So you're used to being vanilla to start with. So that's your basis. So then you come into somewhere like BT, where you got a scruffy little oik like me that's bloody blasting away from the hip, which poor old Gav must have found quite difficult at the time. Brilliant on a Friday and Saturday. Speaks 4 or 5 languages. Superb. He's come up the hard way. Friday and Saturday, I think Gav is brilliant. But I don't rate his race commentary. I rate Steve Day's race commentary better than I do Gav. My personal opinion, I'm allowed it.
Absolutely you are.
And I can sit there and I can remember what it's like. I like a little bit of controversy.
Yeah.
I want to know, when someone's bitching about somebody else in the background, let's have it out there. Let's have that. Charlie Hiscott, who I mentioned him right at the beginning of this, indeed. Charlie is the grumpiest, miserable bastard you can come across. He's, oh, dear me. We call him the sniper's nightmare because of his injuries. When he walks like this. And anybody's ever heard that before, but he broke his leg once. I'm doing a commentary and Charlie comes into the commentary booth and he's laying down behind us on the floor here. He's fell over the cable outside and re-broken his leg.
He broke it at Cadwell, didn't he? Originally. The original injury was...
Oh, he's had more injuries than most riders have ever had. He was a racer as well.
He was.
But from a personality point of view, the riders liked him, the punters liked him. He did a great job. Where is he now? Out of work. He's out of work.
Is he not doing BT this next year?
Nope.
Because he did the whole season last year, didn't he, at BT Sport?
It's TNT.
TNT, sorry.
TNT has taken over.
The language of previous days.
Well, what used to happen is
GNT, sorry.
You would have different broadcasters. So, it's ITV would pick you up, BBC would pick you up, Sky would pick you up, somebody else would pick you up, whatever it might be, Eurosport. But now they're all under one, under the TNT banner. So Discovery, BT, all under the TNT. And it's run by a fellow called Scott Young, who used to be a Sky guy back in the day.
Right.
Not particularly well liked. I'm told pretty much universally.
Yeah.
But then again, bosses generally aren't that well liked.
They're not there to be liked, because he's to do a job.
He's got other things that he's got fish to fry at a different level. But somehow you've found a guy that was good in parfum, good on the grid, quite good in commentary. He will be the first to argue that he wasn't great in commentary.
I thought he did okay with
once his sessions. I thought once he loosened up, he was fine. Yeah. You find that good people usually think they're not that good because their standards are quite exacting and quite high. And Charlie's one of them. He's a good producer. He knows what he wants out of something as well. But he has been let go.
Wow.
Because his personality is the kind of personality that rubs people up the wrong way. And unfortunately...
So he's behind the camera. He's not on camera anymore, but he's
not behind the camera. He's not. He started off as a floor manager.
Yeah, but he was last year, wasn't he?
He was doing floor
managing.
Well, that was where he'd been pushed back to. So he'd been slowly removed from being in front of camera.
Yes.
Removed from being behind the mic, back to what he did before, and then back. He's going to hate me talking about this, but somehow he has found himself on the periphery and out of a job. Now, why is that? Because he has a personality.
And an opinion, probably.
And I bet you this comment section below is going to be bloody, if you're watching it on YouTube particularly, is going to be full of comment regarding that. Bring back Charlie Hiscott campaign.
But we have this, it's a year ago as the date today that I was down at Charlie's place and we did a podcast with him and it was so well received. People are like, what a great guy. People miss his grid walks, people miss his thing. And the same with you and Jack Bernicle. And the old Jack who have an opinion but still have the passion for our sport in the same way that we do. I'm nobody special. I'm just lucky to do this. I'm privileged to sit alongside you to do this.
You're buying.
I don't care. I don't mind. But it's because of the passion of the sport. And the listeners and the viewers, and you'll find this from the time that you've done over the years, it's a really knowledgeable audience.
Yeah.
So if you can talk to them on a level, and you're going to get things wrong because it's a fast-moving And if I get things wrong on here, people pick me up on it. Brilliant. I don't mind, because I'd rather be corrected in a polite way. But you have to have that.
Do you know what? The rule used to be, the old-fashioned rule was never correct a mistake on air.
Not on air, no.
I did. I used to say to Jules, if I'm getting something wrong, go for me straight away. Because everybody that sat on a sofa at home is thinking that already. So why the bloody hell would you hide from it? I mean, it makes no sense.
That's a good point.
That old rule that they had. So we broke that straight away. Jules and I went straight in there. If I thought he was wrong, I'd go for him. You know, and vice versa. And of course, you get an honest commentary. But we move back.
To stand out.
We'll move back into a domain now where you don't correct or take the piss. There's things that Gav says in a race, and I'm thinking, what? And if I'd sat there with him, he'd have got both barrels.
Here's a question.
Podgy doesn't, though.
No.
Because he knows that there's a producer that's a bit worried about that.
Listening in their ear going like, boys, calm it down a little bit. Just be nice.
Exactly that.
Be nice. Do you find it helps being an ex-racer as a commentator?
I think that being an ex-racer is definitely an advantage. I think that even though I can't even imagine riding a modern day motorbike compared with what it is, but there are certain factors that remain constant throughout. Grip, balance, the way you enter in the corner, the way you get out of the corner, all the things that you want.
Feel and emotion, it doesn't change.
Well, it don't. And fitness has changed hugely. I mean, in our days, we were fat dollops in comparison to where they are now. I mean, these are proper athletes now, all of them across the board. You know, I mentioned Mick Doohan earlier on. Mick Doohan was a superstar, but an animal for training. Jim Moody, of course, as well, when I come to training. But I used to, I'd smoke 40 fags a day and drank pints of beer. You know, luckily I gave it all up. When I finished racing, I stopped.
I suppose the nerves aren't there to be calmed, are they?
Well, it wasn't a calming thing. We were always at a party.
Oh, well, true, yeah. I know Reg said a couple of weeks ago, when he was running the med team, he had Ray Stringer and Michael Rutter as his riders.
Great times.
He said he'd got them together for a run up down Cleethorpes front. So he got them on the sand dunes as a warm-up. He said they were nowhere to be seen. He said, you mentioned a gymnasium to Michael Rutter. He needed a double whiskey to get over it.
Well, if it's a bar, he'd have been all right.
Exactly.
It's the only time he went to a gym is if he had a decent bar.
I had to go for the vending machine.
I remember I used to run, there was a 3-mile circuit that I'd run down where my house is, and I used to go, Barry Sheene, Kenny Roberts, Barry Sheene, Kenny Roberts. The only way I could motivate myself to do that running was thinking of those two at the time, because they were obviously the two superstars of the day. And I used to think about beating them. Just because that was the way you motivated yourself to do any kind of training. But no one else used to do any. It was like bloody, going down the gym, what?
Yeah, what I'm doing that for? Parties to have. Tell me about the World Superbike years, because you had Carl, you had Neil Mackenzie was floating around there, and the early days of, well, it wasn't the early days, it was 88, the first one, wasn't it? But the early 90s.
Well, you got Poland Merkel, that's
Scott Russell and everybody.
Yeah, I mean, Scott Russell was great.
Super. We've got Merkel on the show in a few weeks.
Well, bloody hell, that'll be good. And I might just come and sit in on that.
That was, I'm amazed by that. Then that was from the Jules chat. He commented in the YouTube comments, I saw Fred Merkel, I'm like, crikey.
Yeah,
and it's ended up that he's coming on the show. Sorry, Karen, but
Scott Russell was my favourite, because Scott Russell, he was all, in my commentary, he was always, because we were batting for the UK, at the end of the day, our programming was going down the UK. Unlike, as we mentioned, yes, Gavin, who was world feed back in the day, so he had to cover a much broader thing.
You can get excited about the Brit riders.
And you did.
Yeah, he's all foggy, giving it.
As we all were.
So why would the commentator not reflect that?
The villain of the piece was Scott Russell.
Yeah.
So I always used to give him loads of stick. And then of course, being a bit thick, I hadn't really remembered that the World Superbikes came round to Donington. And I remember my producer, Martin Turner, saying to me, do you want someone else to do the interview with Scott? I said, no, he'll think I'm a pussy. I've got to do the interview with him. So I walked into the garage. There was Muzzy.
Yeah, Rob Muzzy.
Rob Muzzy, handlebars. He looked at me like I was a piece of dirt as I walked in there. Scott Russell came over and said, hi, Keith. Oh, cool as you like. Got it straight away. Understood exactly where we're coming from. And believe me, you could have, back in that particular time, if he'd taken exception, he could have torn me bleeding head off. Because Scott Russell was fairly well known for being a bit handy as well. But no, he got the whole thing.
He was a one-man.
At one point. He understood the whole thing. Hi, Keith.
Perfect.
Fist pump.
You went through that. Your Scott Russells, your Carl Fogartys, your Aaron Slights, your John Kocinskis. Your Hodges, Gobert.
Well,
bless him.
Hodgie was a strange situation. Hodgie, he was he wasn't anything like a standout personality compared with the others at that particular point. I mean, he bounces around like a bloody puppy on steroids now in front of the camera. But back then, it was fairly standard stuff from Hodgie. He was quite I don't think he was a sparkling. He's a good kid, nice kid, but not like your oddballs. Like Kocinski was weird. Now there was a man that nobody could understand. Very wealthy man now in real estate in California. But I remember we went out to Laguna with Martin Turner. We went out to do something with Carl Fogarty at Laguna Seca in a test, and Kocinski was testing there as well. And I walked into the awning, as you used to be able to do, walk anywhere you like. And there was a row of chocolate bars all different chocolate bars on the bench. So I thought, good. I had one of them, and I got hold of it and gave it a good old bite through. Left the awning, and the next thing, the balloons got off because it was his sequence of chocolates that he ate during the day for a session, and I ate one of his in the middle of it. And Scott Russell was watching porn in his motorhome,
As he does. We were talking to Mark Lloyd, who worked with John Kocinski. We'll be okay. And he was saying that after Kocinski won the world championship, he left the garage. He didn't see him again for 27 years.
Yeah.
So real unusual guy, amazing rider, but such an unusual character. You don't realise until you were in his circle of how different he was.
Oh, massively different. I remember when I worked for Sky, we had to interview him at Imola. And we waited and we waited and we waited. I mean, he was debriefing for hours with his mechanics, like hours, but we were determined to get it. He got a new Ferrari that was under a cover that was alongside his motorhome. He came out and he stood on a 1 foot square, 300 mil square thing that he stood on. And he got dressed in a certain way and undressed in a certain way. And we had to do it where he wanted to do this interview. And I had to kneel down to get it. And the most abiding thing about it was not what he said, it's the way that his feet stank so incredibly horrible. It really was. So I've got this half-hour interview of his stinky feet up my nose. And the cameraman was a fellow called Daryl Kibblewhite, who's still out. He still does it. He's still doing it. He is indeed.
Great fella. I have a lot of time for that man.
Everybody has. Great guy. I'll tell you another story about Dazzler in a minute as well. So there we are. And Dazzler, them cameras in those days, like carrying an underweight of bloody spuds on your shoulder. And he's beginning to shake because he's had to get right down without sticks. He's got it on his shoulder. Bless him. Stinky feet and John Kocinski. Unbelievable fella.
And there's no stabilising either, is on those cameras. So Daryl, he's a strong lad, but my goodness, it is a difficult time. But the World Superbike, it was a peak time, wasn't it, for the commentary, for the riders, for everything that came a part of it. And your voice is synonymous with it, along with Jules.
Yeah, I mean, they were very good times.
Well, what were your best memories of doing the World Superbike feat with Jules? How many years did you do? It's okay. Can you cope with it?
Yes. I've got no idea how many years we did it together, to be honest with you. I mean, Jules, first time I met Julian was Eurosport had summoned us to go down to London to Osterley, where Eurosport was. It's where the big Sky complex is now. And this always amuses me when I think of this. I had not put the name Julian Ryder together with this bearded journo who used to come banging on my motorhome door, caravan door, to do interviews and stuff. So, you know, I didn't put the Julian Ryder with the Julian that I knew from the track. And all of a sudden, I'm sat there and Julian Ryder comes bounding across. I thought, what the hell's he doing here? And that was the first partnership when we came together. Thank God they brought us together, really. I mean, again, it was Martin Turner started to produce the stuff. I mean, Sky was in its infancy at the time. And I think those days are my favourite, really. Those are my favourite days. I mean, they really are. I mean, I think the Sky Sports days, it was pioneering at the time. Everybody says it would fail. And it spectacularly didn't.
Completely the opposite.
And I think that everybody that took the mickey out of us for a long time came back and said, great job.
But it was a great job. And when the World Superbike side finished, you then took on the passion for IndyCar and Speedway.
Well, Speedway's family, because my mum's brother was a Speedway rider. So all my early stuff went from the earliest, if you like, I was at Speedway tracks. Last night you were with a mate of mine, Sam Malenko.
Absolutely.
Me and him always meet up still for dinner and beer. And we met through television back in the day when Sky first started doing Speedway. But Speedway was a family sport. So I've been I should have gone to Speedway originally, but I didn't win road racing, obviously. But Uncle Alan, quite sad, because Uncle Alan topped himself in the end. So it was kind of one of them ones where I'm now older than my uncle was when he bloody decided to depart the world. And if you are having any of those struggles at all, obviously, reach out. And I'm sure that young Dave here will be putting a link to those kind of things to the description. But important. It gets to everybody at some stage, and Alan, it got to just a little bit too much. And the worst situation for me is I didn't it's probably the only regret I got in my life, is that I didn't recognize that situation that he was going through at that particular time. He looked okay, and we still had great fun together, and he came over to the old farm that I had at the time on his motorbike and stuff like that. But obviously he was unhappy, and I wasn't smart enough at that time to realise.
The awareness is far more now, isn't it?
It is, but
the education of it all is far more now, but it's difficult to see.
I led a selfish life at the end of the day. I should have recognised, something a little more than I did. I would hope, you're right, I would be sharper now, but then again, I'm a lot older now.
Yeah.
And so you perhaps might do. I said to you earlier on, I never worried about people that were being killed in our sport back in the time, whereas I think about them now more than I ever did back then. So it's a strange thing what your mind does. It plays tricks on you.
It does.
As you get a little bit older. But the Speedway was where it all came from for me. To mention IndyCar and NASCAR. IndyCar and NASCAR was obviously pretty important to us at Sky. I got lumbered with a job. I was on a beach in Thailand when the boss rang, Keith, Scottish man, Keith, got NASCAR.
I did wonder where you were going with that.
Yeah. It wasn't Jim. It wasn't Jim again. Jim Moody. And this guy said, will you do it? I said, yeah, all right, no problem at all. When is it? Next week.
Wow.
So I'd fly back a month early from Thailand to do this. And it was quite funny because you mentioned earlier on about the passionate followers of sport. NASCAR has one of the most embedded sports following you could ever come across. And when I called Clint Bowyer, through came the email of insults. And then it was Billy Elliott. He's not a 10-year-old tap dancing star. He is Awesome Bill from Dawsonville, don't you know? So you talked about getting a load of shit. I used to do it. I used to get quite a lot on NASCAR. We hadn't got a clue. There was nobody on the entire team at Sky that knew anything about it. They didn't know anything about NASCAR.
This is what we're playing. This is what you're commentating. This is what you're anchoring. This is where it's going.
And it was so difficult. But by mid-season, I made a note of all the people that were giving me shit.
Yeah.
Because you do that kind of thing as a professional. You want to see you've got to gauge where you're going with it. And in the end, by halfway through the season, the same people were writing up and saying, he's got it now. We quite like that presentation. So I really feel quite proud of my time doing bloody NASCAR of all things, because we turned it around.
Talk a bit of it is an insular crowd. They love what they get. It's like coming into BSB. If you brought somebody in to commentate on BSB or to present BSB that had no passion and no knowledge of the sport, they would be holed out completely, because you'd be found out early.
But you know,
everybody knows everybody, even from an audience point of view, because we've had such great coverage, and we'll come on to what's coming up this year. Because you've had such great coverage, everybody knows who everybody is, because they've done the grid going back as far as Tony Carter. But everybody knows, because it's still the same faces pretty much, especially behind the seat.
Tony Carter was actually quite a good television man, but nobody liked him.
He was also a trained journo, wasn't he?
Was he? I don't know. He was a chef when I knew him.
Well, he also did that as well, didn't he?
Yeah.
I mean, he was also a cartoonist. I did a podcast with him years.
As opposed to being in one.
Is it?
Boom. TC.
He's here all week. Try the wheel.
Well, the bloke that was comparing last night looked like Tony too, a little bit, didn't he? He's fat and ginger.
God bless him. God bless. I've not seen TC for ages. Seen her on WP a few years ago, and that was the last time I saw him with his missus and a couple of kids. Not seen him for years. Well, he finished 2014, didn't he? 10 years.
I don't know.
Since TC finished and Matt started at BSB. But let's talk about the TV situation at the minute, because Stuart's not come out and said anything yet. There's a potential that he will have done a show with me before this one goes out. I think explaining from his point of view where it is. The way you might see it a bit differently. I see it at the minute that TNT have bought Eurosport. They're putting Eurosport behind the Eurosport Sport behind their paywall. But for me, I'm sitting back and waiting because there's still the option of Quest. So I don't know how many races are going to go on Quest, or you're going to have to pay 30 quid, or if there's an option to have discounts and things like that.
What worries me is
tell me how you feel.
Well, how they're going to fit it all in to start with. I mean, it's going to be a major problem to try and get it all on one channel, which is where we're heading at.
Yeah.
And I think that's subscriptions are also a problem. You know, TNT obviously are going to be charging even more for the coverage, which is going to go down like a lead brick.
Absolutely.
I think that it'll be interesting to see how they manage it. I think things have been watered down massively over the last little while. We're going to see nothing quite like the separate personalities. I think you're going to see lots of presenters and commentators that are going to be mixed and matched. You're going to see Steve Day doing across the board different things. You're going to see Rachel Stringer doing across the board different presentations across the different disciplines. You're not going to have the distinct teams that you used to have for BSB, for World Superbike and for MotoGP anymore. I can see that they're going to
one umbrella,
swapping it all around as we go. Then you've got the Liberty influence if that deal gets done in the end. I know we've gone to the European not courts, but the European regulators as to whether that deal can go through. I think it will.
Now, that came out today as we record this, that it's now going to be the middle of June before an announcement's made on Liberty and the takeover of Dorna.
It's the European Union moves at a slow old pace, I'm afraid, and they've got a few other things on their plate to get dealt with, you would imagine. But I think that the Liberty Media thing is going to be something that's going to change things and shake things up. And I think that's where, from a British perspective, we might have a little bit of luck with them being in it. I'm not against a Liberty takeover. I know a lot of people are saying it's going to be too much like F1, but for me, I hope that the money and the investment they put in gives us a situation. For instance, Silverstone feel that Dorna should have done more in the way of promotion for the British Grand Prix, whereas Dorna think that Silverstone should have done more, blaming each other for the fact we got 45,000 people there when we should have 100,000 people there. I think Liberty will give them all a bit of a slap regarding that.
Good.
And what you may find is they decide that, okay, Silverstone's not really doing the business, we'll do a deal with JP. Jonathan Palmer, MSVR, let's go to Donington. Let's have a British Grand Prix at Donington. It's going to cost us money to promote it from there because JP won't do anything unless he's making money. Silverstone clearly doesn't make money. Not
on the MotoGP round.
It can't.
No.
So therefore, going to Donington will cost Liberty to move it to there. But if it's going to enhance the sport in this country, if there are going to be things in place where it makes it a better deal, then maybe Liberty will make that happen. Whereas as it is at the minute, the status quo will remain for as long as you like. Nobody's going to be shaking the stick and moving it all about.
From a commercial point of view, it's got to be better having, let's say, 60,000 people at Donington on a race day than 45 at Silverstone with the whole infrastructure you need for Silverstone.
I think for me, getting rid of the negativity. Yeah. Even after a good Silverstone meeting, there's a tremendous amount of negativity.
There is.
Social media is full of it. I mean, I know that social media probably is only a 1 in 100 ratio of people. You get one person that complains and 100 people that loved it.
Yes.
But it's a situation where I think that's got to change. And perception of MotoGP at Silverstone is not good. And they're not doing enough to turn that. Donington, everybody beats the drum about Donington. Donington as a facility is not as good as Silverstone. The toilets are terrible. Everywhere Silverstone is a massive venue. You can get around it quite well. You can put a lot more on in the middle of Silverstone at the moment. Donington can come up to speed. And from a spectator point of view, wandering around down Craners, there is no better place to stand with your eye line of the tarmac as they come down there with everything dragging on the floor. Perfect for me.
Yeah, I think so. Like, I have one point where I stand and watch when I go to Donington, There's a particular place on the circuit you can, because they've got the big catch fencing up, there is a gap where the marshals go through, photographers and what have you, and it looks at a certain point on the track. And I'm not going to say where it is, because then you can find everything. I'm never going to be able to get back to it. But you're looking down the track and you watch the boys go through there and the girls go through there, and you just look at it and you just go, this is why I love what I do. I can't find anything like that at Silverstone.
No, it's very difficult. There's no doubt about it. I mean, it's the complex and the like is covered by the BRDC suite and all the other, that always amuses me. You'll get all the car guys that come there to have their steak lunch and the like, and they don't get any of it. No, they're just there. The only good thing about it,
prawn sandwiches from the BRDC.
Yeah, the other good thing is those BRDC passes do not give them the right to go around the paddock and everywhere where they think they can go. They still have to get Dorner passes. So I quite like that.
Especially now that
when
they get back to the wing.
Yeah, the wing. There was a folly.
Yeah.
Another story altogether.
Tell me about it.
Well, it's just one of them ones that I think Eccleston made them build something special, and they had to build it on a bit of land that was a bit soft, and they couldn't get underneath the track to put tunnels in and so on. They've got it sorted now, but it cost them a fortune to get it there.
It's a huge amount of money, and the hotel across the way as well.
That might make money in the end.
I think one day.
Yeah.
But it's the infrastructure, isn't it? It's a useful infrastructure. They can get the trucks in, they can get the trucks out. You can get the fans in, you can get the fans out. But with 45,000 at Silverstone, it's not difficult to get them in and out, is it? That's the thing. Whereas Donington, it tends to be a bit more difficult.
Yeah, which is amazing when you've got A42, M1, all the roads that you've got that go past Donington Park, and yet you can't get in and out there very easily. Nightmare.
It does take its toll on it a little bit. But talk to me then now about going then from World Superbike to TNT to what was BT Sport at the time. When BT Sport took the rights to it, end of 2013 it was announced, wasn't it? You started off in 2014. The dream team are back together.
It was 2013. I got the nod from the people that were running BT at the time. It's a strange situation in broadcasting because the North One are the production company. BT set up a production company for providing the infrastructure that made it work, although BT were the broadcasters. So BT dictated who they wanted to commentate and who they wanted to present. North One got lumbered with us effectively and had no say.
This is who you've got.
This is who you've got. You're going to have to produce that as best you can. We had Melanie Sykes, if you remember right at the beginning as well.
Absolutely.
Now, Melanie, basically, the producer didn't particularly like Melanie, so he didn't give her any help, and she looked terrible throughout most of the early days of it.
Which is so unfortunate.
It was really.
It could have been done so much better. But then you can, people are used to seeing Susie, who knows the sport intimately inside out, and as somebody else comes in, Jodie Kidd at the TT, same principle. It doesn't work. And you're leaving them out on a limb for everybody just to go, you're shit. And they're not, but it's the support that they're given.
Yeah, well, they didn't get...
Or lack of.
She didn't get any, that's for sure. I felt sorry for her at the time. But anyway, she backed out that deal, and we went blundering on from those early days at VT. But the transition for me, 2013, I drove down to Le Mans to go and see if I still had the contacts in the paddock that I needed to make it work. I did. And so I came back with Jules in 2014, and we had a great early time in the end, apart from, as I said earlier on, the fact that me and Jules clashed slightly. His knowledge was still as sharp as it was because he'd been doing it all along with Toby.
Of course.
Toby had got the real ump because he'd been moved across and wasn't, part of the deal. I think he still feels
hard done by.
I think he probably does, which... Maybe he was, but unfortunately, arrogance is a strange thing, and he allowed that to get the better of him in as much as that thinking he was a shoe-in for this new job, when there is always forces working behind the scenes to try and nick your job if it's possible. We always used to have the old adage, everyone's out to shaggy misses and nicky sponsors, and the same thing in broadcasting. There's a whole raft of very talented people that are in a queue behind you to try and nick that job. You mentioned Jack Bernicle earlier on. Jack got sick at the end of the BSB round a couple of years ago, and they brought me in on a meeting by meeting basis. Just rang me up and said, "Can you? We're in the shit."
Did you 2 or did you do the showdown?
I did 3, and I did the showdown. Which I was privileged to do, and I really enjoyed doing it. But Jack got quite a lot of stick, and I got quite a lot of accolades at the time because what had happened, Jack and Whit had got too familiar, and they hadn't got the backup of a decent producer. To keep them sharp, to keep them on it. And they'd got this buddy thing going on, and it had lost a bit of sharpness. I come in, Whit is immediately like, I've just shown him a wheel up the inside. He's right on it. As soon as I came back in, Whit was like pin sharp again. And we had a great time. We had a really good time. And I really enjoyed doing that. But sadly, I didn't get that. I wanted that job as well. Steve J got it in the end, but it didn't come my way for whatever reason. Steve had already done a deal behind the scenes that I didn't know about.
Okay.
And so it wasn't.
It was already in the pipeline. Then.
And to be fair, no one teased me with it to say, if you do these 3 rounds, we might be able to.
It was, these are the rounds you need
and
to
that's
for.
there is no misleading going on there. Even though, I'd made it clear that I was in the market.
Yeah.
But they chose Steve Day. Good choice. Good commentator. Not a bad bloke either.
He's all right.
He's all right. Trouble is, he's from the Far East of England.
Within the sport. He's along with Greg. He's one of my closest friends in the sport.
Yeah.
So
I can understand that. I mean, and he's come up the hard way. Yeah. He's had to work hard right from the beginning. He wanted that when BT came online. He wanted that job with for MotoGP.
Yeah.
But instead, he ends up at Dorna. And he's had to work his way through it. So it's taken him 10 years.
He's served his time, hasn't he?
He really has.
Time and been patient and then doing the TT stuff as well, which we spoke about.
TT. When I read that he was doing that, I remember I was on the TT.
Yeah.
And listening to his commentary, I remember thinking, bloody hell, he's really good at this. And we all know how much work you have to do for something like that. It was a really good commentary. And then he missed out. Year before last, I think it was.
This was the bit I could never understand. Because he did 22.
Yeah.
23, I can't remember the name of the fellow they brought in, but he wasn't a motorcycle guy. I can't remember his name. And then they brought him back last year. And the difference was night and day.
Night and day. So night and Steve Day.
Night's too good. Again, he's here all week. Try the veal. It's just such a difficult, because he'd never ridden it, he'd never raced it. He'd done the hard yards of research and reference. And I remember seeing he's got an A4 piece of paper, or it might even be A3, where he's got notes out of an outline of the course. And the first thing I saw when I looked at it, that would make a great tea towel. He said, it just looked like when you go to the Lake District or somewhere like that, where they've got the outline of a country or the outline of an area, and they have the little pieces on it. And I thought, it'd be great Isle of Man souvenir tea towel.
Mine would be X-rated. It's got all sorts of stuff written over it.
Well, along with Chris Boyd, he did a great job, and hopefully he'll continue to do it. Yeah. Well, you raced the TT though, didn't you?
I did once. They paid me a fortune to go there. I won the Northwest the year before, and
a slight digression again, but we'll come back.
Yeah, I mean,
there's talk about
the TT organisers thought I was going to be this road racing guy because I won the Gold Cup at Scarborough and other races, and then the Northwest. The first time I went there, I won that. Never went back. And they paid me enough money to go to the TT to cover all of our travel expenses through Europe for the next year. Because there was money to be had.
Yeah, absolutely was.
Wrong reason for going there, I have to say. And I never went back.
No.
Roger Keane sleeved me down a 350 to a 250. Slowest motorcycle I've ever raced in my life. Perfect for the TT.
Indeed.
Sun was shining. It was a junior then in those days, the 250s. And I just remember what a beautiful day, because it's what we all live for. Blasting around the Isle of Man on a 250. Everything was coming to me with enough time for my brain to work it out. I'd done my homework. We'd just been around there and had a good old nose round for hundreds of miles. And but then I got on a 500. That was just fried your brain.
Tell me about it.
It's a situation where everything happened. You were behind the game as opposed to in front of it. And every curb you brushed, I mean, I remember riding up May Hill on the path up towards the hairpin. It was an absolute freaky nightmare all the way through it. I just could not get on top of the handling of the bike was awful. It was too fast. We had wet and dry conditions, which I hadn't dealt with before. I didn't enjoy it. And the worst thing, I'm used to coming home at 3 o'clock in the morning, not bloody getting up to go out.
Oh yeah, early practice.
Yeah, just nuts. And I'd come from Yugoslavia, as was. Don't forget, we had Yugoslavia then, not what we got now. Rijeka, yeah. Rijeka, we'd just come back from the Grand Prix. So I flew in. I got a busted scaphoid as well, which never helps. So it was one of them things that I did it. I don't have fond memories of it. I don't have anything against the Isle of Man or any other road race for that matter. If they're there, I hope they get the support and they remain there. Sadly, in many occasions now, we're going to lose road racing in Ireland because of the insurance factor.
Sure.
The Isle of Man obviously funds its own insurance and its own situation through the government, so we're not going to lose the TT. But the Northwest is obviously under threat on an annual basis. Everything else going on in Ireland is under threat, which I think is a great shame because we're losing a fair bit of road racing heritage.
Of course.
And I've never been against that stuff, but it isn't for me. I looked at the Ulster. When I went in the Northwest, they took me to the Ulster course to go and have a look round because they wanted me back the next year. I politely declined.
What was the difference with the Ulster course? There's a lot more to learn. The Northwest was pretty much a triangle with a few kinks in it.
Yeah,
which,
it's not too bad.
it needed big balls to be able to keep it flat all the time. But at the end of the day, I had them and I was okay with that.
Flat through station?
You probably would have been on a TZ back then. I can't remember. I mean, Mathers was the one that got your attention.
Well, that's because the house
Mathers
exit.
Well, yeah, I mean, like,
We'll see that.
you were just approaching it at walk factor 10. And when you tipped it in there, you only needed, I mean, the tyres were gone after a lap and a half. Yeah, so you ended up with, back in the day, you were putting bloody nitrogen in them or whatever it was to keep the things cool in the middle. You used to rip the centre out of it. So it was a wing and a prayer type stuff back in that particular time. Didn't matter. Won it, took the money, kissed the girls, came home, never went back. Got the trophy on the wall.
We still do the commentary at the Northwest as well. Are you back there again this year?
Yeah, back there again this year. Me and Stavros. Yeah, me and Stavros join forces. It's funny, we're working together better now than we ever had done. We've been. He's one of the first mates I had in the paddock going back to when I first arrived. It was at Brands Hatch, and they had a three-way shootout between me, Roger Marshall, Dave Potter, Graham Wood. Can't remember who else. There were certain Barry, Stavros, and people like that, factory riders that were straight through to the transatlantic team, and then they had a shootout at Brands Hatch. No, this is
before that.
Yeah, this is before those guys. This would have been 1979.
Okay, yeah, so it is before that, yeah.
And so we had the shootout, and of course, I was the fastest man. Well, not of course, but I was. And I bumped, I think, Roger at the time. I think I bumped Reg. So we ended up going to we were then summoned to go to the Octagon, Kentagon, for the presentation with Chris Lowe, who was the head of MCD, as was Motor Circuit Developments. And they came down to get me, and I'm under my van fixing the starter motor or something under there. And unbeknown to me, I had long hair then, and I'm laying in the oil. So I've got one side of my head that's oil, and I've only got the T-shirt I've got on. And I was just a scruffy yoik that's to ride a motorbike. And so I ended up going to the Kentagon to be presented to the world's press.
With matted hair.
With matted hair and his dirty old T-shirt on. And Barry Sheene stood next to me and said, "Tell the truth, mate, I've never fucking heard of you." The first words Barry Sheene ever said to me. He had heard from me after that, by the way, because that was when I started to go quite quick. But from that day, I've never travelled to any event without a spare set of clothes. It etched into me that I was a dick and I hadn't prepared. You know, what was another old saying, be prepared or be prepared to fail.
Yeah, fail to prepare to fail.
Something along those lines. And that was how it was. I knew how to fix a starter motor on a Mercedes 508D, but I I didn't have my spare kit.
That's why I carry those. I might not need it. There's times where I've never referred to it. But if I didn't have it, you'd feel fish out of water.
You'd feel naked.
I'd feel dumb. It's never good. I'd rather feel naked than dumb. As the partnership progressed through TNT, we'll come to it. We've got a couple of questions from Patron to come up as well before we finish off. When you knew the time was right, how did you feel about it? The whys and wherefores we'll come into after, but
to finish,
yeah.
I was helped with the management at BT.
Okay, we'll save that for the question that they have later on.
There were a couple of little shenanigans that went on behind the scenes. The bit I will say that I don't appreciate was we did the final show, my final show, and at that point, somebody already knew that it wasn't happening next year. Gavin was one of them. OG probably, but certainly management. There was moves afoot behind the scenes. And so when we all went, see you next year, and we sat on them bikes in BT Tower and said, see you next year, sincerely, I'll see you next year. You wouldn't, because it was already pretty much, it hadn't been done yet. We hadn't completely parted ways at that point.
Yeah.
And I certainly didn't have the inkling that I had just a few weeks after that. But that was how that finished off. So the insincerity of it was quite bad.
And to put a positive spin, one of my favourite pieces of commentary between yourself and Jules is Jules's final race at Valencia, and you just went, "Take it away, Jules."
Yeah, I mean,
and I was just like, "Oh,
how could you not?" And the trouble is, poor old Jules.
Incredible.
I mean, he will have finished that lap, and then he would have gone, "Well, it was okay, but I didn't nail it," or something. Because you always think you could have done better, isn't it? In those particular iconic moments, he did great.
He did.
But the fact of the matter was, I know how he would have felt afterwards. You thought, "Oh, I could have said this, or I could have said that, or I could have done this, could have done that." I always said, Jules always used to be rightly unhappy with the way management treated commentators. Because commentators are always like, you've got this massive production that's all about Susie standing there or Hodgie standing there and all the rest of it. Massive effort goes into that. And then they go, "Over to you, commentators." And then everyone puts their feet up and orders their tea and pizza, while me and Jules do the majority of the coverage. And then they go...
So do people tune in on the warm-up lap and tune out on the slowdown lap? So you have the biggest audience, I think is probably fair to say.
But it's treated the least by production. They just go, hand over, done, bang. Certainly that's what it was like with BT.
Yeah.
It wasn't like that with Sky. Sky were interactive. All of our production team were involved in every aspect of it, including commentary. But commentary was pretty much neglected. And I think also Julian always felt, rightly in my view, it used to really get to him that nobody considered what he would say in a production meeting, for instance. If he would say, "We need more technical, we don't have enough, of interest in technical," because that was one area that he really liked. "We don't get an opportunity to talk about technical." And they always go, "Oh yeah, good idea, Jules." And nothing happened.
Just placated him.
And it used to really wind him up.
Understandably so.
Yeah, I think so.
It should have done.
And he was a major part. At that time,
Major part of the commentary, major part of the broadcast, and his own interest and his own knowledge that he had.
one of my favourite meetings that we had with BT Sport, because we used to have so many bloody ridiculous meetings that didn't go anywhere. It was usually about compliance or something. Was we all sat down there and Jules came up with some idea, and this guy from PR said, "Well, I don't think that's quite right," or whatever it is. And Julian said, "Right now, BT have got 35,000 followers on Twitter. I have 80,000 followers on Twitter. I think," and he just slapped this kid down in the courts. It was quite funny. Because at that time, that everyone was fledgling, and they were all just, box ticking all the time, which was amusing for him and annoying.
But back, I don't think we digressed, I think, at some point. Again, it happens, doesn't it? This is what we do. About the move from BSB to TNT. Is what the future holds. Can the series sustain it? Because we used to. A lot of people are saying now that it's always been free. Well, it hasn't, because you've had to buy a Sky package to get Eurosport. But it's part of your daily free view if that's what your package is.
I think people will get over the cost of things. I mean, look, when fuel went to whatever it went to fill your car up. I remember when it was 10 bob a bleeding gallon or something back
when I started driving, it was 62p a litre.
Yeah, there you go. Not much more than 10 bob. But it's a situation where
you can work that out.
We were in shillings and pence back then, mate. None of this decimalisation business.
None of these easy to count.
240 pennies in a pound then, didn't you know? I think.
I'll ask me more.
Yeah. I might know her.
Fred.
Hi, Mum. It's been a long time.
Hasn't he grown?
She said that.
How long's that taken us? 2 hours to get to that point. That's all right. Thanks, mate. You're welcome. Daddy. Anyway, TNT.
Yeah, I think you got a situation with TNT where they will push it forward, but I think that if they muck it up as much as Eurosport used to, you could look at the electronic programming guide, EPG, and never make hide nor hair of it, because it would make no sense. You would set it for a certain thing, you'd miss half the things. It would never work exactly as it's supposed to, and that worries me a little bit moving forward. It needs to be more precise, and it needs to update quicker than it does. it's about whether they care about motorcycle sport at the end of the day, which you tend to find that they don't. It's there. TNT might be overall a different thing. Scott Young, he is across detail. There are certain people that I've heard he likes and certain people I've heard he doesn't like within the TNT presentation and commentary group. And it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. I mentioned his got the boot, effectively, which I think is a massively negative, and I don't understand it personally, but there you go. Plus the fact Charlie's a mate of mine, so I don't really understand how it came to that. And you've got other people that are going to be moving around, and the problem is it's a nest of vipers. Nobody genuinely tells the truth amongst each other. Everybody is always, they realise that they could be. I mentioned Gavin. Gavin will have known because they will have had to have asked him whether he was prepared to take my place before we got to that conversation. There's no way that he couldn't know. But of course, Gavin was shaking my hand and all the rest of it at the end of the season and so on and so forth. You've got to be able to live with that. I'm not bitter about that because that is the way the business is, of course. And the same will happen to him and the same will happen to whoever replaces him and so on and so forth. It will get to that point. Jules, when Jules left, I said to Jules, you need to engineer a situation here where you do a few Grand Prix, get to a few Grand Prix. But Julian managed it slightly badly, to be honest. Okay. And he mentioned to Simon Green, who was then the head of sport, that he was thinking about packing it in. Simon Green went, that will do. Okay, thank you very much, Jules. It's been wonderful dealing with you. And Jules should have slid it in there a little bit gentler and tried to get you as part-time.
Hindsight's a wonderful thing, but again, it's that commercial savviness that I don't have, and Jules is a journey in that sense.
I wish I'd dealt with it for him, because I think it would have been maybe in the end of the day, the one great thing about Jules is enjoying his life.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's really, he's in the right place. He's not looking back and thinking, I wish I was doing that. Actually, having said that, I rang him just a couple of days ago because Andrea Coleman from Two Wheels for Life rang me and said, well, we've got something that might be coming up at the bike shed down in Shoreditch, and said, would you fancy commentating on it? So I said, yeah, that's not a bad idea. I never mentioned anything at the time, but then I rang Jules up and said, how'd you fancy doing a double header? I said, there's no money in it, but I mean, it'll be good fun and they'll pay your exes or whatever. Yeah. And he said, I like a bit of that. Excellent. So me and Jules might be coming back for a bit of live commentary at the bike show.
One night only?
Yeah, one night only. It'll be one of those jobs. I don't know whether we'll record it or where it will go or what we'll do. Maybe there's something there for you. I don't know. We'll work it out later on. But it's moving forward back to BSB. How will it? I think BSB is stronger than most when it comes to what's on TV and what the actual package is. I think BSB is the strongest series in this country over MotoGP, over World Superbikes, which isn't the way it should be. But the show is a great show.
Absolutely is. It's a great product, isn't it?
It's a fantastic product. Things have changed within it. I mean, trackside, no more Fred Clark. Nope. You see, there's an absolute legend in what he does, but within a year, Duncan Vincent took over. Great job. Only trouble is he's Scottish.
Love you, Duncan.
We actually do. Done a great job. Slotted straight in.
But that's 50 years of Fred's commentary. And Duncan is superb at what he does. Fred was superb at what he did. The change, people don't like change.
Well, they don't.
Jack stopped. You did the interim and Steve Day came in.
Steve Day's terrible. Yeah, but it was a very strange thing because Steve Day didn't start off with his feet. He didn't start off running. His first few commentaries in BSB when he came in, I thought were disappointing. And he's a much better commentator. I think, he was under pressure. I think
Steve will admit that.
Yeah, I mean, it was. I remember thinking, bloody hell, Steve, that wasn't like I expected him to launch, and he didn't. Unlike the TT, where he was miles better than I thought he was going to be. I thought for the first couple of rounds of BSB, it took him a minute to get into it.
I think there was a little bit of social media side there
as well. Yeah,
maybe there was such a backlash, and there's no offence as to why. He was,
like I said earlier,
given a contract for a job to do because
the bullets get through. The bullets get through.
We're only human. And I think that there was, and I think it's fair to say Duncan was the same because they see it, they read it. They might not respond, but they read it and it comes up. bad English. It came to a point where Steve was like, I can't look at that anymore. And Duncan was saying, I can't look at that anymore. This is my career. This is my life. I'm not going to come into your workplace and go, you're really fucking sure what you're doing. Well,
Stuart Higgs rang me for that job when Fred was on his way. And I said, I couldn't do it. I said to Stuart, I couldn't do it. I said, I just could not do a whole day in that manner. And I'd take my hat off to Dunk now and obviously Fred before.
Yeah. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, continuous.
It's a massive job and a massive undertaking to get right. I mean, they do it well in the way that they interacted with the radio with Paul Mazzell.
Yeah, Paul Mazzell.
Yeah. Well, Paul Mazzell used to be... I came into my NASCAR studio one time and he was sat in my seat doing a bloody promo. I've known Paul for a long time. He does a good job.
Alan Hyde, Scoop in pit lane.
Yeah.
It works well, Scoop. Still going strong. You're a bad man. I'm just grabbing that. You're a bad man, Huewen. You know that, don't you?
Scoop. I went out on a night out with Scoop in Northallerton one time. And we were up there. I can't remember what we were doing up there. And it was at
North Yorkshire Road Racing.
It must have been something along those lines, yeah. And there was a bunch of lads and their wives and all the rest of it. And then all of a sudden we got to the business end of the night when it was time to go down the pub. And suddenly all the wives were ushered to one side and off we went. It's a northern night out. Bunch of them survived. We did just.
Oh, you personally, once you get north of sort of Colby Glen,
I'll get the old oxygen mask on, yeah.
You'll only be doing that. Before we get into the Patron side of things and the questions that I haven't vetted, I just look at them and see what comes because it's the funniest way to do it because it surprises me as well. Where are we? There's questions for Keith. Oh, and there are a few. Of all the circuits you've raced,
yeah,
what was your favourite corner and why?
I would say Brands Hatch, Dingledale, which is now Sheene Curve.
Yeah.
And that as you come down the bottom of there and up through that right hand.
Through the compression up over the top. I mean, it used to be a slight chicane before, didn't it?
Well, it's not really a chicane, but it looked like
it's one corner now, isn't it?
Well, it always really was.
You could straight line through it.
Well, you caught a straight curve through it, if that makes any sense.
The track it wasn't a chicane, but the track did wiggle, but you could square through it.
Brands Hatch overall is it is my favourite track. I mean, the Grand Prix circuit at Brands Hatch, you can't get much better than that. It's got fast bits, it's got slow bits, and it's just got a great atmosphere. It's a special place for me, Brands. Snetterton was where, I cut my teeth. Snetterton, Cadwell, Mallory to a certain extent. I mean, Mallory Park was, I think, the first track I ever went to on the back of a mate's Triumph Trident. And we rode all the way down the grass verge because there were 60,000, 70,000 people trying to get into Mallory Park back in the day.
So straight from the hairpin through Devil's Elbow, no bus stop.
No bus stop.
When you raced it.
Yeah, that was good old sideways. So it dipped a bit there as well. So
off camber.
That was where Court Ballin said,
like I know what I'm talking about.
No, it's not ridiculous. That. Court Ballington said I was going to come to grief and I tried to pass him at the S's there. And I think the very next session I did come to grief at the S's. Actually, the S's finished my career because this shoulder, I've just had another operation on it, which has worked out quite well because I can move it now.
Excellent, good news.
But it was the one that I was there testing Loctite Yamaha for Steve Parrish, and some guy came he could come out of the pits there and just rode right in front of me, and I remember I dumped it into the deck on one of those practice days there, and it damaged his shoulder, and it's never been the same since.
You won a championship on Loctite Yamaha, didn't you?
I did, yeah. I won the
Superstock championship.
I won the Superstock championship for Steve Parrish
on an FZ 750.
It was, and my favourite write-up came from that Motorcourse 1987. For those of you that want to go back that far, 1987 Motorcourse, and in it was a full page, and there's a picture of me in the middle of this page, and it was a Michelin advert, and it said, "Congratulations, Keith." And I thought, what's this? When I opened the parcel at Christmas time when you got the Motorcourse. "Congratulations, Keith. The only rider to win a championship not on a Michelin." Because we ran Dunlops. It's my bet. And they never paid me. Using me in their advert.
Using adverts. Image rights these days.
Didn't matter.
They worth a fortune.
The ego was massaged. Suitably. It's almost better than payment.
It outweighed it completely. And the final question, we did this before when we did the audio show a couple of 3 years ago. What's your best hire car story?
Oh, always with Julian in it.
So we're going to, I don't know if it's the best one, but it's the one that makes me laugh the most because you had to kind of be there really. But when you go to, what's the track in the middle of Aragon? Aragon, in the middle of Spain. There's got so many bloody good tracks there, I can never remember them. Aragon is in the middle of nowhere and the hotel is always an hour away by car, which means that you come back as the sun is coming down and great roads. Honestly, I can really recommend them. If you've never been to Aragon, stay in a hotel nearby, an hour away, and the ride in is just beautiful in the mornings. And the ride home is dead hectic as well because the sun's going down. You can see all the little villas up on the hills and stuff. And it's just a brilliant drive home after a good day. But in the morning, you start off with it dark-ish. The sun's just coming up when you head into the track. And you've got a long train of all the different, Aprilia guys in one van in a minibus. You've got the Honda guys in another minibus and Yamaha guys in another minibus. And you're in a hire car and it's always me and Jules. And you're kind of flashing past them and you're flashing past them and you're up and down. And I came into this section of road where I thought I can keep it flat through here. So I got this bloody hire car wound right up. And as we went over this hill, it was immediately after it was a roundabout I'd forgotten about. I just passed the Repsol Honda van over this section. I must have passed them at 60 mile an hour faster than they were going. And we flew over this hill. And all I remember is seeing Jules in his seatbelt, stuck to the seat. He was distorted. His whole body was distorted in his seatbelt. And he never even squeaked. I think he took that deep intake of breath. We're going to die. Made it through the chicane. I made it, but I mean, mate, it was close. And another time, COTA, Circuit of the Americas, when you get to the hire car stall, everybody hires some poxy Cadillac or whatever it is. I wanted a pickup. We're in Texas. You've got to have a pickup.
You had a Dodge Ram or an
And there it was, a big red Dodge Ram. You're right. So I got this Dodge Ram and me and Jules were in the Dodge Ram and we're going through, actually, no, it wasn't COTA, it was Indy. It was Indy. Indy is the story. The Dodge Ram's another story. Indy was my favourite. I got this car and Jules is in it. And we're going through the middle of Indianapolis. And I just looked down to change the radio like that. And this whole set of cars backed up. And Jules left it to perfect timing. When he let the final scream out, which was quite loud, I didn't even look. I stamped on the brakes and this bloody great car slid up in a big cloud of smoke and stopped. It must have been 5 mil off the arse end of the car in front. Jules used to make me laugh if he drove because he knew that everyone was going to be taking the piss because everybody drove like bloody idiots. And we're all quite sharp and drive high.
Absolutely, yeah.
And George always used to drive like that. Like,
so the Jag.
It's got a Jaguar, as they say in America. And I remember we came back to a hotel in Valencia. And it's like you've got to go up on the path and bump down to a access road to the underground car park. Oh, he's stuck in his seatbelt. He can't get his hand out the window to press the buttons to get it on. He's getting more and more annoyed. And he's rolled past it, so he's got to reverse it back up. And when he reverses back up, the wing mirror goes, wang, bends the other way. It was like something out of a comedy sketch. It was the funniest thing. Honestly, I thought I was going to piss myself.
And not because of your age.
That's the middle of the night. When I dream about things,
Like my mum.
Yeah. Bless her. You knew your mum out of this. She was lovely.
Speaks highly of you.
She'd be the only female that does. Carry on.
From our Patron page. Links in the description below. If you want early advance of the shows, if you want to ask questions of our great guests, that's where you'll find it. There's one for audio, there's one for YouTube as well. And we have a great list of people who've sent questions in for you, Keith. With the absolute class. First one, Mick Strickland. Who was the best team you rode for and why?
Team. Yeah, and that's actually more tricky than you might imagine because my own teams were the most precise, the ones that I ran myself. I mean, they were the ones that probably, because your destiny was your own, you worked it out for yourself. I like riding for Parish, believe it or not, when I rode for Stavros, because Stavros, there was never a dull moment, as you might imagine. Of course. Stavros is a real mix of people. He's the tightest bastard in the world to work for. but personally the most generous.
Yes.
He's got the two distinctly sorted. You know, he won't spend money on tyres, but if you're out socially, he'll buy you whatever you want. And so he is a bit of a mix like that. But one of my favourite things with Stavros is he's not renowned for having any balls, but he was a great motorcycle racer, which I think people overlook with Stavros. He rode a motorbike really, really well. And he had a great classic style of riding a motorcycle. But because he's made up this thing that he's a joker and he's a this and he's that, people only really remember him for pissing about. But he was a great motorcycle racer. But to work with as a team boss when he ran Yamaha, he had this sort of conflict, because confrontation is not Steve. Steve will work around a confrontation pretty much, till he's got to the point where you've pushed him just a fraction too far. Then he comes out fighting. And one of such an incident was at Knock Hill, and Trevor Nation and I were riding for him at the time. Trevor's a lovely bloke, but comes across quite aggressively when he's not in a great mood. And Steve had got more and more and more pissed off with the fact that Trevor wanted this, wanted that, wanted more things on the bike. And in the end, he crossed the bridge with Stavros, and Stavros just flew at him, gave him a bloody great mouthful, sent him out to ride, and Trevor crashed and broke his collarbone. Oh. But then, double disrespect, Parrish could not believe that he made them cut the leathers off. He said, they were a perfectly good set of leathers because he cut them off because of the pain. Yeah. And well, Stavros would never have done that. He's got both his collarbones broken and stitched up in old style, Stavros. So he'll take the pain rather than have your leathers cut off. So Steve was a good team to ride for. Suzuki, I enjoyed riding for Suzuki when I did for them as well to an extent. But it was, do you know what the biggest thing is? It was an amateur hour. What we did back then was amateur. We talked about how much fun it was, but it was amateur. It was like club racing. Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Great racing on a grand scale.
With reasonable bikes involved. It was nothing like it is now. You couldn't do what we did then now because it would be unprofessional.
Oh, incredible.
I didn't really answer that, but...
No, you did. Well, you did. It's just as an aside to that question, with the way things went in... Was it 8? When did you sign with Barry? Was it
83?
That was 83, wasn't it? If you had that decision again, would you still take it?
Yeah,
you know?
I mean, 100%.
Yeah.
Sheene was... he was a superstar. He had more to lose than I did.
Sure.
I was a young fella coming in. I was fast. I got the same kit as him up to a point before they gave him the factory motors in the end.
Yeah.
They weren't that much better than anything else at the time, but enough. But there was stuff to learn off of someone like Barry. You know,
no, that's fair.
And I did look up to him. And his parents were wonderful. Frank and Iris, and Maggie, bless her, his sister. I mean, who was married to Paul Smart, and Scott Smart, who is nephew of Barry. I mean, he's still a friend of mine. I ring Scott from time to time to find out how his mum is. Now she's moved to Spain, but and I'd spent some time actually sat in the garden at Paul and Maggie's house before Paul was killed, just a couple of weeks before Paul was killed. I'd gone down there just to see Maggie because she hadn't been very well. And bugger me, he just got a bloody Ducati road bike and got wiped out on it, which was
so incredibly sad.
Yeah, I mean, nightmare. But anyway.
We'd all like to go out on our own accord, wouldn't we?
Yeah. It's those that are left behind though that have the suffering. That's the problem.
It's exactly right. Exactly right. A question from a great friend, Tom. Why did you leave TNT? What's the real story?
BT Sport. Now, BT Sport, we alluded to this earlier on.
We did, but I kind of knew that question.
Yeah, I mean...
Seeing that one pop up on the email.
It's kind of it's a situation where it was run by a fella called Simon Green, who had this underling called Simon Dukes, the two Simons. Simon Green was... I always thought out of his depth as a head of sport. He did a good job for BT, got it through.
Yeah.
Maybe that's him.
So this is your life.
He did quite a good job from a putting the sports department together at the time.
Yes.
But he a lot of people couldn't work out how he was the head of sport, to be honest. I mean, there might have been a bit of sky sniping where he was previously.
Yeah.
And Simon Dukes was just one of these, like I say, shiny bum, polishing up a chair all day long and making critical decisions. He was a head of everything except football, I think. And I'd kind of clashed with both of them during the course of it, and compliance. When I as an example, I was with a phone company for mobile phones. I don't know whether it was Talk bloody something or the other or whatever it was. But anyway, they were partnered with BT. I didn't know about that. And they've been taking money out of my bank account for God knows how long for a SIM card that I didn't have. And when I cottoned on, I wrote to them, didn't get any answer. Wrote to them again, called them out on Twitter. When I called him out on Twitter, I get a call off of Simon Duke saying, they're our partners. So I said to him, well, do something about it then. They're our partners. But in the end, it kind of got to a situation where I'd clashed with the wrong people.
Okay.
And I think that they get you in the end. And all the allies that I had at BT to start with had now moved on. So all the major management that hired me and Jules, for instance, had moved on. And we were left with these two shiny bums at the top. And we got to the end of that year. They were looking to try and cut costs as well. I was expensive. I don't know how expensive. They'd got Natalie Quirk, who was doing Speedway, that they didn't know where to put her at the time. I think they did a very smart business maneuver in that they brought Natalie on, who's a lovely girl, to straighten Susie out. If Susie stamped her feet or got out of order, they got another woman to slot in place who was well capable of taking over from Susie if Susie should act up in any way, because Susie's a bit of a diva. So it kind of worked out quite well to have another woman on site. Gavin Emmett was sat there, a bit sidelined really, so they could slot him into my place.
Yeah.
Gavin was cheaper than I am, so therefore they saved money. They got Natalie in place to take over from what Gavin was doing in pit lane.
Yes.
Another woman in pit lane, which again, the diversity box was ticked. They were definitely top box tickers at BT. Where it got a little bit mucky and where the fallout came behind the scenes that your man's alluding to was they owed me quite a lot of money.
Right.
We're talking about pandemic time.
Yeah.
And there was nothing in the contract that said that they could get out of that. And so I said, you pay me the money you owe me and I'll step off politely and quietly and we'll make up a joint PR thing. What I hadn't told them was that I'd already sent my contract to Neil Hodgson's lawyer, Don Mackay, who relished the thought of taking BT on at the time. It never got to that, but it was all ready to be fired straight away. I was all ready with the lawyers to go for it, because it was quite a lot of money. And you know what? The pettiness of it was they paid the money they owed on the very last day of the contract, which was the following year in February. And you just think, they weren't, BT were not the nicest of people to work with. Sky were the best, from my point of view. When I worked at Sky, they really had your back for everything. You know, they were the whole thing. That every team member was a team member,
And they looked after you incredibly well with Superbikes, with NASCAR, with IndyCar, with Speedway. But you could
but behind the scenes,
around that.
behind the scenes, they cared for the people that worked with them and for them. Unfortunately, at BT, it always felt like freelancers were on edge. You know, there was everybody kept quiet, even you knew who were the people you could drink with.
Yes.
Because you were worried if you drank with the wrong people that word would get back what you'd said about this one, about that one, about whatever it was. It was always this feeling of on eggshells with BT behind the scenes. And I think it's still the case. I mean, from the people I speak to, I still get that kind of indication. It's where Hodgie works really well. Hodgie is today's broadcast man. Yeah. He's a crafty fucker. There is no doubt about that. And he knows how to work his way through the corridors without treading on toes. But you never hear anything controversial from him anymore. You know, he never contradicts Gav or takes anybody to task, unless he thinks that it's a particular way of getting away with it. He's got it worked out really, really well. And I think it's to his credit that he's managing to maneuver in a world that's quite difficult to maneuver in and remain with some personality.
Isn't that how modern day workings are?
Yeah.
In most forms of life.
100%. And that's why I'm saying he's today's man.
Exactly.
I'm yesterday's man.
Yeah.
I couldn't keep my mouth shut. He knows how to do that.
Yeah.
And then you kind of get them underneath him. Gav would never say boo to a goose, would, you know, whatever he is yep. And the same through production as well, to a certain extent. You know, Kevin Brown, who is the producer there, you know, the one thing he's known for more than anything else is being able to say yep, because it's always a yes. And the reason why they like vanilla people and commentary is because his job is on the line. He was a freelancer. I don't know whether Kevin is now. He's a freelancer. So anything that you do that he's overseeing reflects badly on him. So as soon as you've got a loose cannon that's in commentary or presentation, it creates a problem for the likes of Kevin Brown and whoever is working with him in that production facility. And so at the end of the day, everything gets watered down to a level that is acceptable. You can't push a boundary.
Despite the way it happened, and despite what happened in the background and the underboiling of it coming to the point of you not being retained, did it happen at the right time?
Yeah, I think everything happens for a reason. I think that I've always understood the way of business. I've always understood the way of the world. So it wasn't a shock. I didn't particularly like the way that people had been shaking my hand and saying how wonderful everything was, and when they clearly knew the lie of the land. But you could say the same. Let's go to Toby Moody. We talked about that. Yeah. Jules knew that Toby Moody was out. So that put Jules in a difficult position.
Very difficult position
exactly.
to be in.
So it happens to everybody. I'm not saying that anybody disrespected me, but kind of I expected a fraction more from those closer in. But
especially ones you could class as friends, as close as you would be. Jules specifically as a friend.
Jules and I are friends.
Yes.
If he knew something about it, I'd be devastated.
Yes.
But he didn't.
No.
And he'd obviously been gone anyway. But the point is I think that these things turn over. They turn over and they produce new opportunities sometimes. I think what it's done for me is, the big excuse was at the time, getting back to your mate on Patreon there, was the fact is that I put out a press release that said, I've had some time off because of the pandemic, spent time with the family. All of that is true.
Absolutely.
It wasn't a lie. But the fact was that had I been given a choice, I'd still be riding in business class and first class to racetracks around the world. But the point had come. And did it come at the right time was the question? Yes, it did. Because I've enjoyed my life since then immensely. I mean, I obviously have other business interests that I like to be involved in. I like spending time at home. My 10-year-old that I have now, I've grown up a bit more with her than I did with any of the others because I was always away. And I enjoy their company. I enjoy their lives. I enjoy their bloody trials and tribulations, which seem easy to me. Obviously a major distraction for them. But so I'm kind of living the dream. At the moment, we're looking at maybe relocating to the Far East. That's something that's on the cards. We've taken some look at what's going on out there and lifestyle-wise. When I left you yesterday here, last night, driving home, another new tyre needed on me bloody car, another 300 quid from a pothole down the road here. I mean, the country's going to pot, literally.
Literally and figuratively.
From all angles, it's just difficult to manage your life. And you always feel like, shit, this place is just not picking up. Need to make a decision on the last years of your life. I have seen so many of my friends that have hung on and hung on and hung on and then died, roll off their perch at a time and they've not enjoyed the last 10, 15, 20 years of their life.
They're the most important.
And they're the ones so there's changes afoot. But the great thing about social media and the great thing about the connection between countries now, we could be holding this conversation, I could be 6,500 miles away.
100%. It's exactly that. My daughter's been in Australia for 3 months and we'd speak every couple of days and it's like she was at home. It was easy.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Cradlo, best and worst personal racing moments.
Personal racing moments, best and worst. Best it's always got to be the podium at the British Grand Prix. You're never going to get better than that. Well, you could have won it. Anton Mang was so far in front of me, I thought I had. It's the truth of it. He pissed off and I hadn't even noticed it.
He was decent.
I'd had to come from a long way back and had me work my way through. And Jean-Francois Boldet, his teammate, was the last man in line. And at Woodcote, I dive bombed it. If you did that nowadays, Dave, if you dive bombed somebody from 10 foot behind, you'd be in the car park. You'd never make the corner. And that was the difference in standards back then. He was so slack going into Woodcote. Second place, thank you very much.
Some of that.
That's the best. Worst moments. Yeah. Neil Robinson killed at Scarborough. Mm-hmm. Talked about it earlier on. He was a good friend to the family. We hadn't allowed ourselves to be so close to people before. So when Smarty was killed, it affected everybody, I think. Donnie was killed a bit later on, his brother at Northwest. Donnie was another good friend. I'm just thinking of a story. We were at a flat in Canterbury after a Brands Hatch meeting. And Donnie, I don't know whether Donnie had encouraged me or whatever. Anyway, I was snogging this girl behind a door when my girlfriend, then Carolyn, opened the door, shouted and screamed abuse at me. And in my slightly drunken and out of order mentality, I hadn't realised it was a glass door that she could see through. And then I had to put up with her driving me home, 100 miles home or something in the Ford Capri, as it was then. She was sideways everywhere. It's frightened the bloody life out of me. Thanks, Carolyn.
Super. And so what then would be your best and worst commentary moments?
Ooh.
Along the same track?
I think there was one where I misinterpreted Foggy as being angry because he thought he'd lost the race when he'd actually won it. That was probably my word. It was one of them really revved up, I was flat out on it. I think it was Hockenheim. Yeah, you've bloody good memory, Dave.
Hockenheim.
Very good. It was Hockenheim, and I hadn't got it quite right. I remember thinking afterwards, you twat, as everyone was thinking at home. And Foggy was thinking after. I mean, not that I paid for it in any way.
No.
Much.
Your best commentary moment?
I think, again, it's probably Fogarty Brands Hatch in front of 125,000 people. There are certain moments in life where you just can't get over that kind of atmosphere, that kind of, you're up in the gods of that rickety old wooden grandstand to do your commentaries from. The monitors we had then were only this big and were grainy and you couldn't see anything and were bloody useless because it was at the end of a massively long wire to get up there. So by the time the feed got to the monitor, it was like bloody, it was awful. It was just terrible. But because you were so on it and you were so in tune, you could spot the shadow of somebody and recognize who it was. So it was kind of okay. But I enjoyed those ones. You can't beat Grand Prix, I think there have been Marc Marquez moments that come in there as well. Casey Stoner, Casey Stoner is still by far, I think, across all of them, and I've seen some real legends. The first alien for me was Freddie Spencer.
Yeah.
Maybe Kenny Roberts Sr. before him, but Freddie Spencer definitely was an alien. By alien, for those of you that kind of follow this but don't always work out the reason why we say it, is because those guys are doing something that us as professional motorcycle racers couldn't quite get. When you're that good, you're alien to even the pros who are trying to work out how you did it. There are people now that are doing stuff on a motorbike. I can't get over loading the front end with the brake on in the middle of corners just to keep them waiting. Stuff they do with these bikes now is just unbelievably good. But I think that watching the aliens is an important part of it, and working my way through. Casey Stoner for me is still just above everybody for me.
I think I've had this conversation many a time, is because it was the height of Valentino, and lots of people were focused right on Valentino because of how he was, his personality, his victories, everything else. Casey was so overlooked as a rider from the fans' perspective because he wasn't Valentino. But as a rider and as a racer, he was phenomenal.
I think
that's right up there.
What you do as a professional motorbike racer is you distill it down.
Yeah.
Take away the chickens on the back and the toilet by the side of the track and all the personality stuff. Just take that away and let's just talk about the actual riding of a motorcycle and the skill involved in what he did. Absolutely. On a Ducati at the time. Valentino was obviously a great motorcycle racer. He always has been. And there have been other great motorcycle racers. Would I put Valentino in an alien position? Probably not. Now, that's controversial. There are people that do things on a motorbike, Spencer for sure. Spencer, the first time I followed him at Jarama, outside of Madrid, down into turn one, it's like a horseshoe right-hander at the end of it. And I followed him out of pit lane. We didn't have tyre warmers in them days. Didn't need them with Freddie. Freddie would go in, drop it into the first corner, and the front would fold. Brrr. Anybody else would have been flat on their arse as soon as the front was tucked under. So there are certain things that he could do that no one else could work out at the time. And there have been other people like that as well. Even Lorenzo was a bit special. The stuff, he was smooth as you like, the way he worked. I don't know. I mean, there's been some great motorcycle races, but which ones are aliens? There you go. Another thing for
in the comments below. Let us know in the comments below which ones are aliens. Just before we move on to the next question, you suddenly sparked something. Sepang.
Yeah. 2015.
Oh, well, that's an interesting one, because
it's just suddenly come to me because it's about Mark and Valentino.
It all started really with Valentino trying to
This will get the comments going.
Yeah, it will do. Valentino trying to get the better of Marc Marquez in his head. Marc Marquez is bulletproof in his head.
100%.
He's really, really a solid young man. I mean, he was solid.
Good, more so than.
Good family background, good backup, good people around him, so it was a solid nucleus of people. Valentino, I made the analogy that he pulled the pin, chucked the grenade underneath Marquez, and the grenade rolled right back underneath Valentino and blew him up. And trying to intimidate a little git like Marc Marquez on track is impossible. The guy exudes talent in awkward situations. But getting to the one you're talking about, 2015 out on the track, Valentino, he didn't kick him. There was all this about bloody, he kicked him. I had Charlie Hiscott, believe it or not, in my ear saying he kicked him. We've just rolled it back. He kicked him. He definitely kicked him. But he didn't kick him. I read it as
his left foot comes off the peg. But that's all you can see.
That's all that happened. He didn't kick him. He ran him out, which is against the regulations. The reason he got the penalty is because he deliberately ran him offline.
He was looking at him, wasn't he? He was
looking around at him. He knew exactly he was there. I mean, the fact that Marquez was lucky enough to fall off, so he gained the high ground morally.
Moral high ground
at the time. And then that was a position that Marquez was going to take advantage all the way down. And of course, then we went to Valencia. Valentino finished fourth. Fourth place was only, if you look at the sheets, if you work it all out, he was not capable of being any further forward than fourth place. He was always going to be fourth. Didn't matter whether the Lorenzo Marquez love machine in front was swapping places or not swapping places. And as it happens, Valencia is an almost impossible place to pace if you're on similar pace. So the whole thing was this massive, of course, from a media point of view, it's brilliant. And you could take sides, which was a shame. But the problem is it became tribal. I didn't like the where it went ultimately. It became quite a football type situation where you're either yellow or red.
That seeped into motorcycle racing across down Tommy Bridewell, Glenn Irwin. The same happened for Donington.
Glenn ain't shy of saying something that's going to wind everybody up, though, is he?
No, but that's the whole thing. And it's become that side of thing. And that was the catalyst for it, I always thought, because then you were booing riders on the podium, which I can't. I love motorcycle racing. I have riders, some I prefer over others. But if they win, I'm not going to. Fair play.
Valentino, great rider, great personality, superstar, fantastic for the sport. If he's got his name over the door, it's going to double the money and the attendance. But Marc Marquez, mega rider. Mega personality. I like Marc Marquez, and he's good for the sport, in my view. Casey Stone is still my hero there.
We're on the same page. Sometimes you've got to be careful how you say these things, but yeah, we're on the same page completely.
Hey, what we talked about earlier on, I said to you, don't I? If you've got enough money and you're old enough, you don't give a shit.
I've got one of those. It's not the first one. From Chris Turner. Thank you, Craig. From Chris Turner, who was the biggest influence in your career? And if you could own one of your race bikes, which one and why?
TZ750 still got. Arnie Fletcher still got my TZ750 that I won the British Championship in 1979. So that's still there for me to cock my leg over when I feel like it. We took it to the National Motorcycle Museum a couple of years ago. It's still a runner if it wants to be. It goes out and competes every now and again. The problem that I had being the normal working class lad was that I would have to sell the previous year's motorbikes to be able to fund the next year. So that TZ350 that finished on the podium and all the rest of it, and a lot of love and care had gone into making it. For instance, we'd had this special tank made by Donfab up in Derbyshire somewhere. And we had this special tank made and it looked like a penis because the shape of it. The idea was that I could get my knees tight in. So this bit was, the shaft was a thin bit. Then it got a big fat head on it to get the fuel in it. We didn't worry about weight distribution so much because I was quite long and lanky so I could get out of the back. But it did look like a dirty, great big dick. I was thinking about putting a blue vein on it or something. Sorry. But it was kind of one of them ones where the development of that bike, I would have liked to have had that bike back. It wasn't worth a lot of money, but I sold it for quite a lot of money to a car dealer in Earls Barton, I think it was, who run Dave Fabian. I think Dave Fabian used it. That's going back a bit. Good 125 runner over here in the UK back in the day. But anyway, so I quite like that one back. And the RG 500s from 1983, they're only production bikes, but they're really cool bikes. They work really well. I enjoyed them.
Superb. And who was the biggest influence in your career?
I would like to say Kenny Roberts, because Kenny Roberts could ride a garden gate fast. There was never any whinging. You know, he just did the business. He had that kind of steely manner about him. And he was fast on flat track, which in those days was a bit of an alien thing.
Was it mile-long oval?
We didn't really know anything about all that old business. But when somebody rides a TZ 750 on a mile oval, you know, that Kenny Roberts was he's the only hero that I've ever had in motorcycle racing.
Fabulous.
So,
Fabulous. And you got to race against him and be on the same track. And
I can't ever remember beating Kenny, though.
And that's why I didn't go that far.
Neither did I. Sadly. No, I can't remember ever beating Kenny. I think I might have beat him when he had an exhaust split once, but that was it.
I think one of the races I looked at the transatlantic, there was Eddie and Kelly at Donington.
Yeah, but you're
different postcode. And they were on the works.
When you look what's came across, Wayne Rainey,
yeah,
you know, like Kevin Schwantz, all over for transatlantics. I mean, these guys were the top end. Such a shame that America's in such a shit position now.
It wouldn't work the same, would it?
No, it wouldn't work the same. But we haven't got anybody coming out of America really in quantity. There's one or two that are sort of hovering there.
But you're not going to bring Roberts, Baldwin, Aldana, Singleton, people like that. Steve Baker and
Singleton, bloody hell.
And his pig.
Dale. Y'all.
Proper Southern.
Next.
Thank you, Chris. Final one, Simon Breeze. Thank you, Simon. Who was your fiercest rival and best mate in the paddock? And then also two-stroke or four-stroke?
Two-stroke always, of course.
Thought that might be.
There's rumours about Suzuki bringing a two-stroke out in the future somewhere. At the moment, I seem to remember hearing somewhere. Greatest rival. It's probably got to be the likes of Gardner. Here, massive competition between he and I for what was the was the Masters Championship, which was the Motorcycle News Masters, which was the British Championship effectively.
Yep.
In 1983, which I ended up winning. But it's quite a physical competition between he and I as well. Like, you know, I remember me and him holding onto each other's lapels in the paddock at Hockenheim one time when we were arguing over something. We never actually hit each other, but I know that I wanted to hit him and I'm sure he wanted to hit me.
Something to do with the push bike.
It was something to do with the push bike. Yeah, I tried to undo his front wheel when he kept wheeling it. So I thought, it's his front wheel, so it comes out next time he bombs it up. But anyway.
I'll remind you.
Yeah, he did. But we're not close, but we do talk with each other quite often. If we're around in a paddock or something like that, spend a bit of time with each other. I rate Wayne was probably the last of the old school tough guys. It wouldn't matter the standard of the bike. He would ride it beyond its capability. And I have huge respect for him. And of course, he was Roger Marshall trained.
Yes, of course.
Roger Marshall
with so many ways.
So Gardner.
Stay hydrated.
Gardner was one that was I remember a Snetterton test session that we were having up there. I went out, broke that record. Wayne went out, he broke that record. In the end, we had the track virtually to ourselves. Most people stood on pit lane watching this because it was spectacular. Then he'd go and knock a tenth off of what I'd just done. I'd go out and knock a tenth off of what he'd just done. And it was just me and him, waving our willies in the air.
That's exactly what it is.
To try and beat each other. And it was great fun. And then we all ended up in the bar. So Wayne probably was the one that got me focused quite a lot from a competition point of view. Never really, the problem you have, and I don't know whether it's like that nowadays, like this nowadays, but you only really remember the people that beat you. There was this group of people behind you that
you can't see them.
You didn't really worry quite so much about it. How arrogant does that sound? But of course, arrogance and sport go together quite well.
Hand in hand. Especially in our sport. You have to have, there's a fine line between confidence and arrogance.
Yeah. Well, it's afterwards you've got to dump that.
Yeah.
You've got to be very careful you don't carry that forward into your normal life. And there are riders that have done that and they've ended up with a very rude awakening. I might be one of them. I'm not sure, but I'm well past that now, so it doesn't matter. Hopefully, I've had a little bit of humble drummed into me. But again, that's for other people to make their own mind up about.
It is.
I mean, we can go back over personalities that I've met and loved over the years in the paddock. It's been, I think that Roberts, Gardner, Sheene as an example from a public relations point of view more than a riding perspective. Wayne Rainey because of his accuracy. Wayne's doing. Bloody hell now. Talking. We had this argument once in the Thistle Hotel. I don't know what it is in Australians and me, but we had this argument. I remember I'd got my arm around him, and then I realised as I squeezed him just how much he trains and I don't, because he kind of started to swell up like the Hulk did. And I thought, I'm going to need an ashtray here to help me and bash him over the head with it or something. I realised just how much stronger than me he was, even though he was a bit smaller than me.
He was a little guy.
It was quite funny at the time. It's amazing. Anyway.
Fantastic, Keith. Thank you.
You're more than welcome.
This has been an absolute journey. I've loved every second of it. Thank you for your time last night. It was great to sit on the table with you and Sam and Ian Barker.
That's true.
But God bless him. What a great guy. But this has been brilliant. I hope you've enjoyed it at home. The links are in the description below for Patron, for the YouTube channel, everything else. This has been superb. Ladies and gentlemen, it's Keith Huewen.
Thank you very much, Dave Neal.
Thanks, Keith.
Well, a huge thank you to Keith for his time and for his views on the sport. It's great spending time with him. Always good value. And a massive thanks to Chris Herring as well for letting us film at the Stirrup Cup down in Kettering. Big thanks also to Sean Ride at 77 Fabs for sponsoring this episode of Off Track. If you'd like to sponsor an episode, drop us a line, offtrackhost@gmail.com. Next week, it's the former world and British Superbike champion and Burnley's finest, TNT commentator and pundit Neil Hodgson joins us. Another great show in the offing, and I can't wait to bring that one to you. But until then, thank you so very much for watching, and please do look after yourself. Bye-bye.